Good morning and welcome to the Polk County School Board's work session on this fine day at the beginning of the new year. We'll now call the work session for January 8th, 2024 to order. I would like to thank everyone for being here. Also give a shout out to our legislative body who just started session today, and we hope the best for our delegation. Would also just like to say thanks for all the staff that's here with us, available and accessible. A lot of good energy in the room already. Seeing y'all walk down the hallways was quite affirming. We're humbled to serve alongside of you and the most educated workforce in Polk County. I would like to start by reading our Who Are We statement. We are the Polk County Leadership and Governance Team. If we were to pick one phrase to describe us, it would be student-centered, because when we come together to work, we lean on our diverse backgrounds and experiences to ensure that our decisions are focused on providing a high-quality education for all of our Polk County students. The four most important things to our governance team are: 1, operating with integrity; 2, respecting our students, staff, families, and each other; 3, establishing a culture where stakeholders feel valued, supported, and have opportunities for personal and professional growth; 4, supporting an approach of continuous improvement to ensure student outcomes. Collectively, we need to work on behalf of the children we serve, and we're going to find avenues of agreement so that we can govern the district in an effective manner. There's no acceptable alternative. We will always collaborate in a respectful manner in order to enhance opportunities for each student and staff member. We will not disparage others. Our students will thrive because we remain committed to supporting the whole child. We hope to encourage, engage, and empower our students and stakeholders to create a community of lifelong learners. At this time, I would like to turn it over to Superintendent Hyde to lead us in our work session today. Superintendent Hyde.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. See if we're on. There we go. Good morning, Mr. Chair, board members, colleagues, and community members. Pleasure to be here with you this morning. Just a reminder, today's workshop, there is no follow-up meeting. There is no vote on any of these items. Some of these items will come back before the board at the next subsequent meeting towards the end of January. However, we wanted to take or seize the opportunity for this workshop session to ensure that we address and provide you an update on academics, on our academic metrics, and then the strategies being incorporated to help address those. The first two items before you today are boundary issues. On Fred G. Garner, Ms. Ann Everett is here as well. She'll provide an update based off our conversations with USED as it relates to establishing priority attendance boundaries and those types of things so that we can continue to provide support to that community. But Ms. Everett's prepared to have a conversation with the board this morning and address any subsequent questions as a result. So, Mr. McLemore, I will turn it over to you, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. For purposes of the record, Josh McLemore, your Director for Planning and Real Estate Services. The first item on the agenda is the Attendance Boundary Committee's recommendation of their option for the rezone for James E. Stevens Academy. This has been an item that has been ongoing for some time, but this rezone is to support the district's initiative to help convert what was James E. Stevens Elementary to the academy and transition it into the magnet program. So the data that I'm showing you this morning is it is dated only in the fact of this is the exact data that was shown to the Attendance Boundary Committee that led them to their decision of which recommendation that they approved. Some of the figures have changed, but not drastically. And just to highlight some of those, at the time, the enrollment for James E. Stevens, their enrollment was 342. This was a figure back in 2022. In checking their enrollment this morning, their enrollment is 357, just for comparison purposes. For their zone right now, there are approximately 643 district students that reside and live within that zone. Of that, only 300 chose to attend the elementary school itself. There were 42 students who elected to come into the zone, and that could be through a myriad of choices, either employees that work there and there were their children, or they just opted the choice. Some of the top choices for the zone, one, obviously, James E. Stevens was the top choice for the zone. We'd like to see that. But also Bartow Elementary, Spessard Holland, Floral Avenue, and Highland City Elementary. These are all the choices that are taking place amongst that pool of 643 students. Stevens's permanent capacity is set at 584, 0 portables on site. And again, just a quick, the pie chart just shows you the breakdown again of the 300 students that lived within the attendance boundary and choose to attend, and then the 42 that come into the zone. In the middle, you can actually see the current attendance boundary itself for James E. Stevens. Highway 60, just as a benchmark here, bifurcates or cuts the attendance boundary into quadrants to the north and south. Option one that the staff presented to the ABC, which was also the option that the committee itself is recommending to the superintendent, and we are presenting it to the board for you this morning, is pretty much what you see here on your screen. Option 1A, that attendance boundary is Spessard. Holland's attendance boundary would absorb the northern half of what was the Stevens attendance boundary north of Highway 60, and then Floral Elementary would absorb the southern portion south of 60. In terms of possible impacts, we're looking at their attendance, the attendance for Spessard Holland and Floral Elementary. You see the figures there in the table. And again, that data is as of October 20th, 2021. Option two, the only drastic difference between the two would be that there is also a portion of the attendance boundary that would go east of 98. But again, outlined in the green, it may not show up well on your screens. The green hashed area is what was the current zone for James E. Stevens. And then option three, because they're it's hard to distinguish the differences, but there was a small isolated pocket. We're talking maybe one city block pocket that was on the east side of 98. And those are your big distinguishing points between options 2 and option 3. And then option 4, there was a slight modification as we followed pretty much the intersection right where the school district's transportation center is. That intersection overpasses. You start heading east out to Lake Wales, or you take 98 south, headed south to Fort Meade. That intersection there, we chose to follow a different roadway to try to come up with a proposed boundary. But again, at that major intersection, there aren't any homes at that intersection necessarily, but what drove that analysis was just ease and improve efficiency of transportation services. So with that, that is the presentation for James E. Stevens Academy rezone options. And again, option 1 was the ABC's recommendation to the superintendent and to the board. Pending your questions.
Ms. Wyatt.
Thank you. I know you alluded to the dates were slightly ahead of when we're actually looking at them. Is it possible to get the updated attendance for those schools, especially after the first year of them being able to select Garner or to select Stevens as a magnet school?
And we are currently working with Pupil Accounting right now to get you that exact data.
Perfect.
We will have that updated for you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mr. Sharpless.
First, I want to thank Mr. Fix, Mr. McLemore, and the ABC committee for your hard work. And this one and the next one you're going to be presenting. As a former member of that committee, I know the work that goes into it. My question is not necessarily directly related to this, but it's kind of partially. I'm wondering, where are we at on our comprehensive rezone?
Comprehensive rezone, staff has worked with the ABC. We have arrived at all proposed options for the high school level, and we are still trying to compile it all together, put the mosaic of all the zones together so we can get a holistic analysis of what the true impact may look like. But the ABC has arrived at recommendations for all the rezones for the high schools. We're still operating as best we can to try to put it all together.
Thank you.
It is a very large task.
Oh, yes, it
A
is.
very small department who, as Mr. McLemore, doesn't toot his own horn, but considering how many different issues that his team is pulled into to help address, comprehensive rezoning, that's why we agreed to do it in phases. So the high school recommendations will be coming before the board shortly. And then we'll provide you with a more accurate timeline for elementary and middle school comprehensive rezoning. Even after Datacom yesterday, there are some really good examples of opportunities that we may have to rezone some of our schools, or definitely some opportunities for us to continue to explore expanding opportunities in a lot of our elementary schools as well, to help serve as attractors, but to also help bolster academic performance. So, some of the rigorous programming, IB, Cambridge, other options are out there, dual language, STEM. So we'll be exploring some of those with the board and bringing recommendations to you in the very near future. So, one of the things, just Mr. McLemore, if you would, I always look at, resulting utilization. So the recommendation one, just, for the purpose of being transparent and having that conversation with the board, between option one and option two seems to keep both schools under their 100% utilization. However, option one, which is the recommendation, puts Spessard above 100%. Does that force them to then have to utilize portables on that campus?
So you raise a valid good point, Mr. Superintendent. Something to keep in mind here, as a part of the grant application, and Ms. Everett will allude to this as well, one of the requirements to be in compliance with that grant is that they have to retain so many students within that area in order to be eligible for the grant. So while these numbers that you see before you, that is worst case scenario, that if all of the children in that zone decided not to attend the magnet school or did not elect or get in to attend that magnet school, this is what the resulting impact may look like.
But if that were to happen,
Correct.
would that force us to have to then put portables on that campus?
We would have to explore that, yes, sir.
Ms. Wyatt?
I apologize. I think you answered the time. I was just going to ask about the timeline for the
Elementary.
Winners Elementary.
Elementary and middle school, they're developing a timeline now. I had a meeting with Mr. Fix and Mr. McLemore just last week, if not maybe, after following cabinet of last week. They raised some concerns about the current workload and some of the projects, and what they want to do is make sure that they fulfill the expectation and bring a comprehensive proposal forward that doesn't require any significant revision or make any errors, right? So elementary in particular is a heavy lift when we talk about rezoning, because it's not as simple as looking at one or two schools. There's a domino effect, as you very well know, having done this before. So they've asked me if they could postpone and delay by a few more months that opportunity, and I said absolutely. So they'll develop a timeline, and I'll share that with the board at the next January meeting. You'll get that as an update.
Are we still thinking 25, 26, or
Yes.
potentially okay?
Yeah, 25, 26, so that way parents would have more than enough notice, and we would be able to host all the community meetings again to reassure families that, unlike some of the redistricting conversations that have happened of late, our recommendation is a grandfather process, that no one will be forced to transition to a school. Their child will be able to complete that current enrollment at the school. So let's say a student, just because it's here, let's say we're talking about Spessard Holland. If a student's a third grader, but somehow they got rezoned to Floral, we would allow that family to finish at Spessard and not force them to have to relocate, because the objective is to basically rezone comprehensively, and that's going to take several years to completely phase in. That also gives our transportation department, our HR department, and everyone else the timeline that they need to be able to address changes in staffing allocations and those types of things, routing, transportation. So it's coming up with a proposal is the easy part. Implementing it after the fact becomes the difficult part. So we want to make sure that we've covered all those bases. So you'll be seeing that. I'll provide an updated timeline at the next meeting in January, but we're probably looking at 4 to 6 months for a final recommendation to come before the board.
And any potential changes that we would make with these schools would not change again under that proposal?
Right now, no, because these two schools, as well as several others, are in the MSFP grant. And so we would assume that, no, at this time, we would not see any, let me rephrase that, we would not see any significant changes to these because we're already wholly addressing these, because their attendance boundary becomes far more open and less restrictive. So we would not anticipate any significant changes to these.
Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, you may move on, sir.
Our next rezone option that the ABC has arrived at a recommendation involves Fred G. Garner Academy. Much like the prior proposal that was before you, again, the data is dated from the time in which it was presented to the committee itself. At the time, the enrollment for Fred G. Garner Academy was 895. As of today, as of yesterday morning, it was 900 even. So just for comparison purposes here. In terms of the number of students zoned for Fred Garner, we are talking about an area that is much more urban in nature. You have a higher residential population and density in that area. So that's why you see a figure for Fred Garner. There are 1,453 students at the time we pulled this data that lived within the Fred Garner attendance boundary area. Of that population group, about 55% elected to actually attend their zone school. That worked out to be around 800 students. From that, we had 95 students electing to choice in through various avenues for that. The top choices for the Fred Garner zone, obviously, we'd like to see the zone school being the top choice. There were 800 students there, but some of the others were FSC scholarships, electees, Jewett School of the Arts, Brigham Academy, and or homeschool setting students for that area. Fred Garner's permanent capacity at the time prior to its modernization effort was 833. However, that has changed to 945, exactly. And again, the portables are being removed off the campus there. So again, at the time, there were 8 portables, but those portables numbers are diminishing as a result of the modernization effort. So again, when I was referencing its general location, again, we're dealing within the area in and around Auburndale and Winter Haven. So we're dealing with a much more residential urban setting. So we have a lot of elementary schools within this area. So when looking at the analysis for this, it had multiple impacts across multiple schools. But again, keep in mind, this is a magnet transition rezone effort here. So as a part of the magnet requirement is they have to retain a certain percentage, so many students, to stay within the magnet program. So keep in mind, as you look at the numbers of possible impacts for the rezone of the adjacent school boundaries, that's worst case scenario. I'll go over the figures of the current enrollment as we move on in the slide, but just keep that in mind as we look at the numbers here moving forward. So in option 1, the rezone, again, we're looking at pretty much breaking up the Fred Garner attendance boundary in 4 quadrants, if you will. And you can see it outlined in the blue hashtagged area. Fred Garner had a disconnected attendance boundary itself up to the northeast. And then its main attendance boundary followed into the main area here, just north of Inwood Elementary. So again, using some of the main avenues, major thoroughfares, major roadways, we looked at trying to balance the impacts it would have on the adjacent schools. But again, keep in mind, with the magnet schools and the magnet requirement, they have to retain so many students to attend the magnet school itself. And just some blow-up portions here. Again, let me go back. Just because, again, we're dealing with such a large area, we had to break it up and zoom in a little bit more here. And the pockets here, north, that would be rezoned for Auburndale Central. And then on the south here would be, this area would be absorbed by the Inwood Elementary area. And outlet, in this blow-up picture here of 2, again, that area would be absorbed with Lake Ship. Up in the northeast quadrant, that broken up portion, that would be absorbed through Lake Alfred's attendance boundary. And then on the east side, that would be absorbed through Elbert Elementary, which is also undergoing a modernization and expansion effort for that school. So option one is the attendance boundary committee's recommended option for this. And again, the projected fish utilization, the end goal, or what that end impact would look at with the adjacent schools. Again, worst case scenario to where none of the 895 students stayed at the magnet school itself. This is worst case scenario, how it may impact the adjacent schools. Of note, Lake Alfred would be pushed over their permanent capacity to 124% capacity. So in that instance, portables would need to be in place to address and add that needed capacity. However, not all 895 students are leaving. They are. We'll go over some of the figures there. In option two, again, we are pretty much just going on various options of pretty much option one, trying to minimize the impacts for these schools. So again, in option two, looking to expand more of the Inwood Elementary to absorb more of that southern boundary here. And then to the north, instead of having that area go to Auburndale Central, that would go to, hold on one moment, let me check my notes. That's Walter Caldwell Elementary. Name got cut off on the map. And then in option three, looking again to have Lake Alfred absorb that northeast quadrant, and then using the highway system to pretty much be the dividing line between Alfred Elementary and Elbert Elementary here. Again, not much change to quadrant 4 here, in that Elbert Elementary would seek to absorb much of the area that used to be Fred Garner. Again, looking at some of the impacts here, now we have two schools that would be pushed over the 100% threshold here. But again, Lake Alfred Elementary, instead of being at 127%, they would be at 113, but Lakeship would be pushed over their permanent capacity. So again, we'd have to be looking at portables at multiple sites now. And then in option 3, instead of having Lakeship absorb some of the pockets to the southeast for Fred Garner, this would be more absorbed into the Inwood community. This was just more of a directed action or analysis we were asked by the ABC to look at. However, Inwood is a very built-out campus. It is a very small campus. It does not have the facilities to support major busing for students. But we did run the analysis to see what that impact would look like. So again, in terms of potential impacts, Inwood would be pushed over the 100% permit capacity threshold. They would have to have portables, but again, that campus has already been built out. So again, really wasn't seen as a viable option for that school. Lake Alfred, really no change for their numbers based off of option 2. With that, now it's a lot to take in, but pending your questions. And again, just for reference, option 1 is the ABC's recommended option.
Ms. Miller?
I just have a couple of questions. First of all, this garners a much different population than Stevens. And my concern is you could see a significant difference in how many people chose that. So, and this might not be your department, but I would like to know what we did to market to that community to make sure they knew their option and what they had to do to remain at that school.
Ms. Ann Everett would be the point of contact on that.
Because they had a very high retention rate of their students this year.
Yeah, we were like at 97, 98 going in. For Garner, it was really pretty easy. So for both schools, as he mentioned, we needed to keep the students that were already there. The idea is to bring in new students, not to displace any of the current students. So we did direct marketing to all the students. Their application, because they did have to apply, all their applications were auto-populated. Right, so the letters that went home, literally the parent just had to sign. In the past, they had to fill it out, and that created a barrier sometimes in getting people to follow through. So we provided those applications. There were parent meetings, there were direct mail outs, there were Connect Ed messages. Both schools hosted different events. The principals called, right, the APs called, the whole team kind of got on board, and it was just you name it, we did it to get them in. It was pens, pencils, different types of things, just kind of getting the excitement about the idea of the grant and what it could bring to the school and the plans that the schools had. And I will say, we didn't have any problem keeping the students that we already had. Like they were not only ready to stay because they've already been there, they had relationships with those schools and their teachers and their administrators, but they were excited about all the things to come. So that really was not a challenge. And looking in past grants, they actually were more successful this time. For whatever reason, I have to tell you, the administrators did a bang-up job. And that was really during the time that we didn't have a magnet staff at the district yet. We were still in the process of trying to onboard people. So a lot of that responsibility actually fell to the schools, and they were amazing, and they had great success.
So they've had success in keeping all of their students, including ESC and ESOL?
Yes, ma'am.
Because I think the community feels this because our history has been create these programs and then push certain populations to other schools. And Elbert and Lake Ship cannot be the dumping ground for students out of Magnet that aren't accepted.
So I can speak a little bit to that. No, none of the students were asked to leave. None of them were, provided a pink slip, if you will. They literally were staying where they were at, and then we added services if need be to support them, including where these schools are now a direct feed. So like Stevens now direct feeds to Union, and Garner direct feeds to Polytech. And because some of those populations didn't already exist in the middle schools, then we had to add additional units from either the ELL team or the ESE team to make sure that we were supporting those same students in their new flow. So actually, we expanded their footprint of services.
I think that's important. It takes a while for people to see the culture shift in that. Polytech had not had those resources.
Correct.
And so I think it'll take a while for the community to understand that it's no longer, that we are now making an effort to meet the needs of all students at these schools. Because I'll brag on Code Academy, they just do it well. They serve their entire neighborhood with the supports needed, and that's flowing into Blake, which is great for Blake as well.
And the same for Union.
Yes,
The same for
Union.
Union. They didn't have those services before, and they do now.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Wyatt?
Hello. And I apologize because I don't want my passion to come off
Sure.
in the wrong way, but I will most likely not be able to support this. Partially because I feel like the community was misled in this grant application. They were told that Garner students would be able to stay there for the long term. If you look at the Florence Villa area, which slide 2 is probably the best place that you can see it, there are 6 zoned schools, and then that does not include Brigham and Jewett School of the Arts. So for elementary school, there are 8 different schools that little tiny neighborhood is going to and that we're busing them to. Taking Garner out of play for a zoned school would mean that the only zoned school in North Winter Haven is Inwood, which does not have bus transportation. So any student that lives in North, and we can count Alberta all day long, but Dundee turns into Central, so I really can't consider that North Winter Haven. But by taking several of the schools out of play that are now magnet schools, we don't have a school to zone them to. And we know that being able to send a kid to a school in their community is one of the best things that we can do for them. The way that it was presented originally, and the reason that I supported it originally, is that we would have a zone for those students that live across the street, that live in that Florence Villa neighborhood. But that is not what has been able to happen. And I know you all have done a great job investigating with DOE how we can make that happen. But I don't know that is going to be the solution, because while it's great and nobody's outside of Garner is choosing Garner and taking those seats now, I don't see that being the case 10, 15, 20 years down the road. I think it's going to end up being the same thing that's happened with Brigham and JSA, where it was really hard to get students to go there in the first 5 years. And now people that live across the street can't get into the school because they're the most popular schools in the area. So I think this is a larger conversation of what are we going to be doing with the magnet landscape, and that we need to make sure that there, especially in our areas like Florence Villa, that there are neighborhood schools available. It doesn't have to be every neighborhood school, but there has to be one in the area. I mean, we're sending these kids to 2 of the schools are in Auburndale, one's in Lake Alfred. Sorry, 3 of the schools are in Auburndale, one's in Lake Alfred, and 2 are in South Winter Haven. one's in Eagle Lake. So we're not even keeping them near the community that they're in. And this is a higher risk community that needs to be able to, we know that they're not going to be as involved when they have to be on the bus and mom and dad can't just walk across the street to pick them up. So that's where I am standing right now. I would love for you to, I know you've talked to DOE and kind of gotten some feedback on them, so I would love for you to elaborate on that a little bit, just so.
Yeah, so Mr. Hyde had kind of asked the same questions, right? And so still new to this grant, still learning like crazy, wanted to meet with our project manager at the Federal Department of Education. And I can't speak to the history of how the school was chosen in as part of the grant, to be very honest with you. That kind of predates me, so I'm a little limited there as well. But I wanted to call and make sure that whatever information that I'm sharing was accurate, because like I said, we're still learning. So first and foremost, in the grant, it does say that as we onboard magnet schools, we're going to follow the approved lottery process. So that just kind of is what it is. So the questions that we asked her were three primary questions. First was, is it possible, because that is the grant, right? Is it possible to amend the grant, and this is what I believe the question was, to change Garner specifically to have a traditional zone as a magnet school? Her answer was maybe, in that first we have to be able to meet our fundamental goal, which is to prevent further MGI or further minority group isolation. So we have to be able to meet the grant, which means we cannot increase the percentage of minority students any more than 5% from the time that we started. So that is the fundamental purpose of the grant and the reason that it was awarded. So she said, if that is possible, then you could potentially do an amendment. I will tell you, we have increased 4% from the time that the grant was submitted. So we've got 1% to play with because we've had and kept so many students from the community that's just kind of where it's at right now. So her advice was twofold. One, assuming that we were very confident we could meet that goal and maintain a traditional zone, then we could potentially ask for an amendment. That's not a quick process. She said this year it's really not going to happen, right? Because you have to write the amendment, which is quite lengthy. You have to have all the documentation to support it. Then it has to go through the MSAP grant office administrators themselves, and then it goes to the Office of Civil Rights. And the lawyers have to approve that outside of our regular lottery process. So that's a pretty lengthy process, not impossible. The next question, quite frankly, was, what if we just didn't include Garner in the grant? Right? What if we said, we kind of changed our mind, we'd like to pull Garner out? Then all that money has to be returned. And we've sunk in a considerable amount of money, so I don't think that's advisable right now. And then the third question I asked her was, let's say, is there a happy medium or a negotiation to be had? Let's say that we can achieve the fundamental purpose of the grant, right? We're confident that we can do that. And we get to the point that we do have a large percentage of students coming into Garner that are not fed from that local community. Could we then amend the grant or amend our process to say there are a certain number or percentage of seats set aside specifically for students within that zone, and then we'll take from outside, but we're actually controlling that number and percent of students that are coming in so that we can kind of determine, yes, this percent is set aside for the traditional zone, and then these seats are open for outside just within that entire magnet zone. And she said yes. And if we were going to consider anything, it would be that. She said, again, not this year, but as the data supports that, then that's a much more likely scenario moving forward.
Thank you. And just to clarify, I am less concerned about, when you're looking at that slide 2, the cluster of students that live right next to Pinewood and the cluster of students that live right next to Garden Grove. It's the bigger cluster where they are literally walking across the street to get to Garner. This is, I think, probably gerrymandering at its finest when you look at the Garner zone. It's not even contiguous in many places, but making sure that those students that live within that 2-mile radius that could walk to Garner, and many of them are walking to Garner, that they're not being displaced and we're not creating a bigger barrier for them to get into the school. And that we're also looking at, I think we all talk a lot about getting your kid into school for kindergarten, but the transient families in that area that are moving in in second, third, fourth, fifth grade and can't get their kid into the school across the street is a problem. And that's something that I know we've talked about it many times with some of our schools in Lake Wales, that you can't go to a school in Lake Wales if you didn't start there at the beginning of a elementary, middle, or high school, just because it's harder to get in those higher grades. But I want to make sure those students aren't left behind, because busing them to another city to go to school is not the answer.
I think there's two things. One, if we get to the point that we do the amendment and we set aside a certain neighborhood, right? I don't think it has to be the entire zone that those seats are reserved for. I do think we can specify it's this community within this amount of distance or this pocket, however that can look. And at the same time, that's not the idea about moving in and being able to attend that school is not unique, right? You mentioned that. So one of the things that we've done to ensure that we're getting more students in is we've continued those lotteries through December now until we have to reset for the next school year, which we've just recently done for this current application. So in previous years, once the lottery finished in the summer, regardless of the number of seats or the seats that opened up through that school year, those seats remained empty, right? So with Mr. Hyde's support and the idea that if we have a high demand for these seats, let's put these students in those seats. And that's one of the things that we're seeing at Garner is, we've seen some students leave because they do have a pretty mobile population that's not 100% stable yet until that grant kind of continues on a little bit. And so we've had those seats and we've continued to try to fill those seats as they've opened through December. And a lot of those are community students. The staff is really good about when the parent moves into the neighborhood, right? They walk into the school and because not everybody is fully aware that it's a magnet school, like our established magnet schools where the neighbor next door knows, what's happening. The family walks in, I'm here to register, we just moved in, I'm so sorry, we have a lottery process. They hand them the application, they accept the application, it gets faxed or emailed to our office and we put them right in. So it hasn't been a process where we've been turning away students if at all possible because we want to maximize their seats. I will say one of the other unique challenges to this one is that they were at their capacity according to the grant total number of students before we actually even started this year. So the reality is we're kind of struggling to even meet those numbers because we don't have as many available seats to invite students to attend like we do at Stevens. So Garner is kind of this unique animal that we've never really had a lot of experience with before in a lot of ways.
And I think that's the concern, is that if it's already at that capacity, we're going to quickly, I think more quickly than we have with most schools, see students from outside of the neighborhood applying and getting in and not having seats for students inside the neighborhood. So, and I apologize, I don't want to take all of the time because I know my colleagues, I'm sure, have questions too, but I really would like to see us reconsider how we're using the MSAP grants. I think there may be a reason that other districts aren't applying quite as often, and just because I think that they were great to, when they started out there, it was a great concept, but I think we're seeing the ramifications down the road. And like I said, I am less concerned about the impact this will have on Garner in the next 2 to 3 years. I'm more concerned about the impact this is going to have on Garner in the next 10 to 15 years. But just curious, how much have we spent of the MSAP grant dollars?
I would have to go back and look. I can get that number for you.
Okay.
I would feel remiss if I did walk away and didn't say that I hear you, I truly do, to say that the MSAP or the Magnet office here at the district and our predecessors, they have done a phenomenal job of turning around schools and creating a demand for schools, right, and done some great programming. And I know you know that, but I feel like if I walked away from here and I didn't say that, it's going to get back. So let me say they have done a tremendous job, and they truly have,
And
right?
I went to all magnet schools in Winter Haven.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that all of our students have the same opportunity,
Right.
and by
Agreed.
shipping, there's literally not an option left in North Winter Haven, and that's where I struggle with supporting this, is that
There aren't that many walkers to that school, though. I sent you the heat map that Mr. McLemore had pulled for me, because I had requested this, because our intention was, to Ms. Everett's point, for that third option that they were willing to consider. I wanted to know how many students resided within a quarter mile of school, how many students resided within a mile of school, how many students resided within 2 miles of school, because then we could establish some form of standardized attendance boundary or some type of guarantee. Within a quarter mile, there's only 7 students of the school. Within a full mile of the school, there's only 404, which is down from almost 500, because there is some turnover in that community. And then as far as 2 mile radius, Again, this is inclusive of those 0 to 2 miles. There's approximately 1,175 students, and it's down from almost 1,300 the year prior. So I think that, to Ms. Everett's point, the greatest flexibility we have is with that third option that we've been discussing with USED. This is the inherent problem with an MSAP grant, especially in what you would consider to be a densely populated geographic school site, is that it is arguably at some point, or let me rephrase that, it could at some point, preclude certain students from the community from attending that school. So there's several options for us to follow here, or to embrace. Number one is work with USED to create the greatest flexibility we can. As you've heard from Ms. Everett, every student who currently is within that attendance boundary who has applied for that school has been accepted. They still have multiple extra buildings on that campus that are being utilized for other services, so there is some expansion room there for us to continue to explore if need be. But also, to that same point, and to your point, earlier point about the number of other school choice options in that community, what are we doing to market those? So we just had Datacom yesterday, and Jewett was there. And speaking to Mr. Sears, he has space, and he has a waiting list. So why are we not expanding his seat options so that he can draw more students? Well, Garner is now a STEM academy. Not every student gravitates towards STEM. So there are other programmatic options within close proximity to the school, and I think that's one of the ways we can help address this issue by and large, is how are we marketing comprehensively all of the programs within that community so that all these disparate school options are there and families don't perceive it that I'm having to leave my neighborhood school, but now I'm pursuing an option that my child is truly interested in. And so I think there's those two opportunities for us to create the most flexibility we can within USED. However, if the board has strong feelings about this, we'll pull the financials. I'll share that with you as soon as we can and give you an update as to what it would cost us to return those funds. If the board wants to, move back to a traditional zone, I'll support that. At the end of the day, however, Garner will always have to expand its options for students because it's a school choice option now. Regardless of MSAP status, we've invested in that school to create a STEM Magnet Academy that, regardless of federal funding, I would want to see us continue to provide as an option to all students. And this is one of the reasons why you do magnet programs. One of two reasons. Number one, you want to increase the academic rigor and opportunities for students. Number two, you want to diversify a school. That's exactly what the intention behind this was, is how do we diversify? As Ms. Everett said, one of the other strategies, though, that we have not considered to date is capping enrollment. And we are at the point now, we had this conversation at Datacom, where I'm probably going to start making some recommendations to you as board members that I'm going to start capping enrollment at certain schools because we can no longer sustain this. We cannot have a school that went from 4 portables to 18 portables. That's a failure on our part, my part, the team's part, in long-term planning to say, okay, now it creates a hardship for families because now I got to bus students across to another school. But the reality of it is, there's an inherent, as you know this, there's a large cost associated with the infrastructure and rental or purchase of portable units, and they're not long-term facilities for us, nor should they be viewed that way. But part of this goes back to comprehensive rezoning. So how are we moving away from that strategy? It's a strategy when you have immediate growth and no opportunities to build new construction. I get that. But we need a long-term strategy and a mid-term strategy that says, how are we phasing those out and rezoning so that students have a physical seat within a traditional school setting? And so I think this is more of a comprehensive issue, a much larger concern, and you touched on it very well, actually, which is within that entire community, there's only one traditionally zoned school left.
And there's no buses to it.
Well, yes, ma'am. That we can fix, but I think this comes back to the comprehensive rezoning conversation, and again, are we providing enough choice options for families so that they feel like even if I have to leave my neighborhood school, I'm not having to choose to put my child on a bus for an hour to an hour and a half to get to the next best option? How are we, as you watched, we've been expanding our choice options within zip codes so that parents can have ready access and better opportunities for their children. So I think there's a multiple multiple step approach here to help solve this problem. But I am pleased with the process we've used thus far at Garner to ensure that students who live within that area and literally could walk a block to the school still have access to that campus. But I do think at some point, the best choice, if we end up retaining the MSAP grant, is going with option number 3. But again, to what I said earlier, capping enrollment. At some point, there's only so many seats available. We've got to lock it at that point, and then anybody who comes in after that date has to go to the next school choice option. And that is not an uncommon practice in school districts. So I think those are some possible solutions. And you and I have had long conversations about this. I know that this is very dear to your heart, and it's a concern for you, and it's a concern for us. So hopefully you're seeing, and board members, you're seeing, we're trying the best we can to work within the constraints that we currently have. But again, I'll provide you the financial analysis so you can help make an informed decision as to whether or not we should continue down the road of the MSAP grant at that site. So, Dr. Allen?
Yeah, well, thanks for the depth in the conversation, Ms. Everett. And even going back to the communication standpoint, I really loved hearing about that. And this goes to what Superintendent Hyde was saying, my question as it relates to long-term planning. When we look at our heat maps, these are static, right? So obviously the Garner scenario is way more complex because of the adjacency and the amount of schools. But like the Bartow one, as Mr. Hyde noted, the utilization on Spessart-Holland and that recommendation 1 is so high. So my question is, in our long-term planning, what was the future looking like as well? Because obviously, just within the two, with Floral and Spessart, as relates to James E. Stevens, we only have those two options. So the growth is not really necessarily happening in the core Bartow. However, if you go out towards Highland City, that's where all the growth is happening. So we're looking at those pupil counts only from a static standpoint. So my concern is in relation to that long-term planning. So whereas this one, as well, is so more complex. So I'd love to hear a perspective how we're thinking in these recommendations and what the ABC committee gave to us, and then demonstrating what that growth looks like around. So if we say go for the recommendation 1 with Spessart-Holland, with it already being over utilization, are we going to be faced with more complexity as development grows in that area?
So that's where your capital improvement plan comes in. As the FTE counts come in and we get a count of how many students are enrolled at certain points within the year, we take those counts into, we take that data, and then as a part of the concurrency process, as the district looks at, hey, how are we going to have enough seats for these new subdivisions that are coming online? How fast are these subdivisions coming online? We marry up that data together, and then we start looking at the zone schools and adjacent schools, and that drives us to start looking at, okay, do we need to start considering either an expansion or addition at schools to provide additional seats and capacity at those schools, or do we look at rezoning again, which is not a popular choice, or another option, if it is feasible, if there's a site somewhere within that area for a new school to provide enrollment relief. So those are typically your 3 avenues that you look at to try to find that balance between maximizing the resources we have to also meet the demand that our community continues to face.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
Ms. Fields?
I have a couple of comments on as it relates to the portables. Mr. Hyde, you mentioned that. For those of you who have not been on the board for a long window of time, I just want to give a little bit of history. When we did the sales tax referendum and had the community to provide input on whether or not they wanted to support that, one of the main reasons for that was because we wanted to get away from portables. And so, to me, looking at any of these options, we need to make sure that we are not reneging on what we had promised the community and promised the Polk County commissioners. So I want to make sure that that's understood. And then the other factor is we have told the Winter Haven community that Garner Elementary is going to be a magnet school, and so I think we need to be very mindful of reneging on that. I understand everything that Ms. White has said about making sure that there is equity and making sure that the students in the community have an opportunity to participate at Garner. I agree with you 100%. That's the way it was sold. I just think that we need to be very mindful that if we're going to do anything to backtrack, that we need to get the community and the school involved and make sure that we're all respecting what originally was discussed and agreed upon. And I know that we're not saying that, but that's an option of looking at backtracking. And I know we're having discussion today, but discussion will lead to conversation being had that now we're going to pull the grant. And I don't want that to be out until we have done our due diligence and make sure that that's the situation that we need to pursue. And then my other question is, has Mr. Bridges been involved in the conversation as it relates to the magnet school and the minority piece and all of that? Because that's very important as well.
Yes, ma'am. We've had quite extensive conversations about that, and it does remain a concern. Especially to the extent that this grant is something that was processed some time ago, and we're well into the implementation stage of it now, and changing it is sort of like trying to turn an aircraft carrier. It takes a little while, and I appreciated Ms. Ann Everett's outreach to the U.S. Department of Education and speaking with their representatives from the Office of Civil Rights, because they are really the gatekeeper for these. It is, as she indicated, it is possible to make changes, but they're not things that happen quickly. And I think that it was manifest from the conversation that before changes would be made, they would want to see how things stack up as we implement them this first year. So yes, I have been involved in it, and if we wanted to make changes along the way, I would certainly be involved in those conversations. We would probably wish to bring back, you may remember Maurice Sneed, who worked with us as a senior partner with Hogan and Hartson in Washington, and is probably the smartest person I know in handling these sorts of matters with the U.S. Department of Education. And we would probably wish to engage her and have her help us shepherd those through the process if there were changes to be made at that point. But I was gratified that there was a willingness to consider changes. That's a whole lot better than having a door slammed in your face. So that is not nothing.
Thank you. And Superintendent Hyde, can you just say one or two statements about your thoughts on portables and the comment that I made about the sales tax referendum and all of that wonderful stuff? Or you don't want to say anything, and that's fine. If you don't.
I will be more than happy to comment again on portables. And I mean no offense to Mr. Fix or anyone else, because portables are very much a flexibility option that school districts need, again, when we incur quick growth. But I have a disdain for portables because I do not believe that they serve in the best interest of our students and community. I think, number one, it's a visual blight issue. I think, number two, it's a cost burden that we assume because we pay an incredibly high lease cost for each one of those portables on an annually reoccurring basis. We have concerns for safety, not necessarily, security, but I have concerns when it comes to weather-related events. So, portables, again, are something that are necessary. What frustrates me and what I'm committed to working towards, and through the half-penny sales tax and through other means, is when portables become our only solution, that's when that needs to be reevaluated. Because when you hear about a school that started with 1 or 2 portables, now they're up to 18, the reality of it is this comes back to rezoning and comprehensive rezoning or capping enrollment at schools. If we're seeing that much growth at a school, we need to be more aggressive and more proactive to simply say, that's it. We cannot, there's no more room at the inn. We have space at other schools. These are your options. It's unfortunate, but we've got to bus you there. Until we can either put an addition on a campus or we can build a new school within a densely populated community that's growing. Again, it's a short-term solution, but I don't think it's the best long-term solution. I don't think it can adequately support instruction. And depending on what types of classes are trying to be taught in portables, again, creates flexibility, but I think it hinders us academically, and I think it impacts students who feel like, well, I don't even get to be in the real building. I have to be out here in the portable field with, it's just, I think there's a lot of issues that go along with it. But for me in particular, the cost also is a significant factor. When we look at how much we spend a year on our leases or our purchases of portables, it's quite large. And so is there an opportunity for us to revisit that, do some things a little bit more aggressively through comprehensive rezoning, and then slowly start phasing these out? And then return those dollars back to the general budget or even the capital budget so that we in turn can build additions onto our campuses. I think there's a trade-off there that we need to continue to explore, and will be part of the conversation about comprehensive rezoning.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Ms. Wyatt.
Thank you. And I just thank you, Ms. Fields, for your comments on making sure that we keep it a magnet school if they were promised a magnet school. I think the concern in the community right now is we were told that we would get a magnet school that we would have access to, and that if they don't have access to it, had it not become a magnet school, they would have gotten this beautiful new building with all of these amenities that if they can't even have access to that, then what was the point that the wool was pulled over their eyes? So that's where I want to make sure that, so thank you for clarifying that, but because that is not the intention. We just want to make sure that they do have this great asset and that they have access to it.
Okay.
Thank you.
There are no further questions or comments, sir. Thank you. Mr. Pitts, I saw you came down. Is there something you want to contribute, or?
I was only going to make the clarification that we do not use sales tax funds for portables.
Yeah.
That was.
No, thank you. I don't think I said that, did I?
No, I just wanted to make sure that was.
Yeah, no.
clarified.
To Ms. Fields' point, we had committed to the community to use the funds to do physical enhancements and to help phase those out, in particular in our older facilities, for a lot of the same reasons I highlighted. So thank you. Please.
Mr. Pitts, I know that we don't use that, but when we go to the commissioners for the impact fees and stuff like that, all that is looked at, in my opinion. And one of the rationales for us being able to get the support from the county was that we were moving away from portables. So I hear you, but we just need to make sure that we are moving away as best we can. And I think that the superintendent did a great job explaining how we might be able to do that through capping or whatever the situation may be. But I appreciate you making your comment.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, the next topic is on science and social studies instructional materials adoption. Carrie,
Hi,
good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair and the Honorable Board and Mr. Superintendent Hyde for the opportunity to share with you guys our process for the science and social studies instructional materials adoption. I'm Carrie Foster. I'm one of the senior directors in teaching and learning who oversaw the adoption of these materials. In this brief presentation, I just want to share with you our district process, the timeline, the outcome, and our next steps moving forward. This right here is just a visual for you guys to see. The state bids are released, or they're eligible for us to review. We have two adoptions that took place for social studies and science, so they're slightly a little bit different with that, but we are reviewing them at the same time. We notify vendors from that bid list. For social studies, we actually are only looking at approved list from the state. We are waiting on the science list, which will come out later this spring. Then we have a public call for material reviewers. The committees review the materials, and then we release the public notice of the committee's recommendation. That's why I'm standing before you today. And then later on, we'll move to a public hearing and the board approval of these materials. This right here is kind of our timeline. So the state of Florida approved the K-12 social studies instructional materials that can be used for the 24-25 school year. Selections that I'll be sharing with you for social studies are strictly from that list. The state of Florida is currently going through the adoption of our science materials, and Polk will only be selecting science textbooks from that final list, which is expected in this spring. Polk County's current contracts for both science and social studies instructional materials will end this June. Our adoption consisted of 6 days of meetings with committees meeting 2 days each in November. All of these meetings were held at Jim Miles, and the committee members had access to digital and physical materials to complete a rubric for each of the title reviewed. Just to kind of let you guys know a little bit about the participation, we did have, it was an open invitation to committee members, which included teachers, administrators, instructional coaches, parents, community members. We had, the makeup of the committees was 80 committee members serving in 11 committees. 36 of our Polk County Public Schools were represented, and we did have 25% of the selection were either parents or community members, a part of those committees. We did have, we surveyed the committee members after, and we had an overwhelming response of just positive responses. I did want to just give you a minute to read this quote that came from a parent. And I felt like this feedback really did exemplify like what took place in our committees, and was very grateful to have such parent involvement. In the selection process, committees typically chose their top 2 or 3 titles. However, you will see there are cases where only one title was selected. That means that for social studies, there was one only on the approved list, or there was only one on the bid list for science. You will notice that these recommendations are alphabetical by publisher name, and these are the committee's recommendations in science for the K-5 science, the middle school comprehensive science, and anatomy and physiology. These are the committee's recommendations for continuing for science for biology, chemistry, earth space science, and environmental science. You'll see continued of our science selections for this one here, and I know you guys have a copy of all this as well. Then for our social studies, we have our middle school civics, our middle school U.S. history, economics, and psychology. Again, these ones for social studies are strictly from the approved list from the state. And we had continued from social studies here in high school. And then we also, at the same time in tandem, held the advanced placement courses as well. This is one for science. And then we also had them for social studies. Our next steps is that the public will be able to begin to review these materials. It begins today and will last for 20 calendar days, as stated in Florida statute. And they can go to the website listed there in order to review those materials. There's a feedback form that they can submit any particular feedback that they had. And then also, I would just like to extend my gratitude to each of the dedicated committee members and curriculum specialists who worked tirelessly to ensure that our Polk County students have access to high-quality learning materials.
I see no questions or comments. Gary, good job. Thank you very much. Board members, the peer item has been moved to the next meeting in January per request from both staff and one of your colleagues, so we'll go ahead and revisit that at the next meeting. Sorry, did I say June, July, or January? Goodness gracious. I'm trying to rush, trying to get to June, sorry. So the peer process will be addressed in January, the next meeting in January. There are 2 components to the next. I'd ask if we could, I'll let Mr. McNaughton go first, and then board members will probably take a short break after that. Mr. McNaughton's going to present on academic strategies that have been implemented to help us address our academic performance on our campuses. And yesterday's a great example of one of those strategies he will touch on. But yesterday, we held a full day of Datacom after hosting a half day on Friday. Datacom is a new strategy that we've implemented for the last 2 years, where we target or invite schools that we have seen that aren't necessarily on a positive trajectory or who are on the bubble, right? And especially in this year, with the lack of learning gains, there are a lot of schools that arguably you could make an argument that are on the bubble between a C and a D, or a C and a B, or we want to see better consistency in their overall academic performance, because we have schools that are kind of on this roller coaster from year to year that ebb and flow. And so the goal is to look at all of their academic components. We look at their historical data. We have conversations, for example, if a school sees a significant decline in an academic area, then we have a conversation, or the questions are asked, have you had staff turnover? Is that one of the reasons why you were seeing a change? We look at their number of vacancies, and we address any issues. So if they say, for example, throughout the day's meetings, everybody who's there, just so you're aware, an entire cabinet is there, as well as multiple departments are in attendance as well, so that I can ask direct questions of them when a school asks for a specificity of support or a need. Yesterday, a lot of facilities questions came up, and some HR questions came up. For example, if a principal said, hey, listen, one of the problems I'm having is I've got this candidate we extended an offer to, and they've been waiting since November to get processed. So then Mr. Warren's there, he immediately gets a response, does a double check, what's the holdup? Is it us, or is it procedurally something that the employee has not finally submitted to us to allow us to proceed to move forward with their hire? And so then we're able to address that with both the administrator and with the potential employee moving forward. Facilities issues are also a big deal. We want to ensure that our campuses are conducive to teaching and learning, and that we're not dealing with significant issues on campuses, whether it's paint, whether it's landscaping. A lot of landscaping issues came up yesterday, surprisingly. I'll give you an example. Lake Region High School noted that we need to trim the trees in their parking lot because the fire department had indicated that while they're beautiful, the trees actually can pose a barrier to the fire department being able to get their emergency vehicles on through the parking lot because of the overhang. So we are going to go ahead and trim those trees. We had another school identify that they had a tree that's dying and is splitting, and one of the branches overhangs one of their walkways. So Mr. Fix is going to go ahead and mobilize his team to get that addressed. So things like that help. But there's a lot of pointed questions for administrators. What are you doing to build capacity amongst your team? What are you doing to target your assistant principals to help make them instructional leaders? How are you differentiating your management of different departments? Because you can't be the sole person driving it. What are you doing to build that culture of expectation on your campus, not only with staff, but with students? For example, we looked at PM1 data, and in mathematics for almost all the schools, it's alarming how low PM1 was. But I will tell you, when you look at that data and then you drill down, and I'll just give you a short example before I turn it over to Mr. McNaughton, this is the level of specificity in which we drill down into their data. So when we look at third grade math, for example, and their first assessment of the year from the state says that only 1% of their third graders are proficient in mathematics, and there's 400 kids in the third grade, I think we'd all agree that's a problem. But here's the problem. When we see PM2 data and it's jumping from 1 to 25 or 26, what that tells me is somehow we de-emphasize the first PM assessment. And I've shared this with you before, but just as a reminder, we had this conversation throughout Datacom because all the principals, even if they're not presenting, remain in attendance. So they get to hear feedback, and when there's something accolades for another school, I highlight that so they know they can reach out to that person saying, hey, you're doing a really good job in science. I'd like to talk with you. But in the math area and other areas from PM1 to PM2, what we had to reinforce was, and Mr. McNaughton and the team, were the ones that first pointed this out to the state, that part of the inherent problem with the 3 assessments each year is that if a student blows the test off for PM1, blows it off for PM2, they're already predisposed to being below grade level because the assessment is adaptive and intuitive. And there's only about 30 to 35 questions depending on the content area and the grade level. So the test will never scale to grade level. So just follow me for a second. When they go into PM3, which the state looks at as the final cumulative assessment data point, if you've only been a level 1 student in PM1 and PM2, you never get access to grade level standard questions, so we can't even tell if you're on grade level. And so part of this is the culture of emphasizing the importance of these assessments, not just to our staff, But how are we messaging this to our students and, more importantly, to their parents? Because these assessments matter. It's not just about school grade. Throw that out the window. Our concern is if you continue to score low, you never get access to more rigorous coursework. By your own fault, you will get stuck in a reading intervention class or a math intervention class, and by direct default, you will not get access to an academy or a career tech ed course because there's no space in your calendar for that, your schedule for that. And additionally, you'll never get recognized and recommended to go into to an honors class, an AP class, an IB class, or a Cambridge class because your academic performance history doesn't indicate that you have the capacity to do so. So we've got to create these false barriers for students. So I just want to give you a little bit about Datacom because I would tell you, you could reach out to any of the principals involved. They all did an amazing job. There are tough questions, but they don't leave there beat up. They leave their understanding that there are resources available to them, and time after time after time, they were incredibly complimentary of the team out there serving to support them and gave great feedback. But I just wanted to highlight that as one of the examples, and I'll leave it to Mr. McNaughton to cover others. But since it was so fresh in my mind, and quite frankly, in the future, I'd be more than happy to invite you to attend a Datacom, simply because we still have some coming up. Yes, ma'am. And because I think it's a great process. It's a respectful process, and it's less about putting, let me rephrase that. There's equal pressure on the administrator improving outcomes on their campus, but I would tell you that the team sitting in the audience today that attends Datacom will tell you there's equal pressure on them. Because a lot more questions get asked of them in the audience than get asked of principals. You know, Carrie and Miss McKenzie and Miss Everett got drilled throughout the entire day. What are we doing about this? Tell me what you're seeing here. Why are we waiting on instructional materials? You know, and the school can't fully implement something. And so they're able to address those questions in real time. And for several of them, they now have plans they have to work up with schools because there's a school hasn't been able to hire a math coach the entire year. Well, what are we doing to backfill that? What can we do? Carrie's now searching the entire school district to say, are there any viable candidates for us to target? So it's a great process. And so I'm encouraged by it. It's much better this year than it was last year. We continue to refine the data we're looking at. We spent a lot of time looking at SPED populations. We spent a lot of time looking at ELL. And the principals are honest. And so I appreciate that of them, and I appreciate that of the team for scheduling it. It was a very long day yesterday of Datacom, but we still have one more coming up. And I thought we had another half day. But we will make sure that you get invited to a subsequent one when we get mid-year data. So.
I have a question about Datacom.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Miller.
I think that's an excellent opportunity for principals to, it's an excellent opportunity for principals to have that time to ask. My question is that opportunity given throughout the year? Because when I'm at schools, we have this culture of asking for help or asking questions to the district reflects poorly on a principal, and we're trying to overcome that. But that must have been how people felt, because they'll say, I've tried to hire this person and this class is empty because we're waiting on HR. And my first question is, why haven't you called someone? So I'm hoping we're changing that perspective of they're asking for help. If they've had 8 teachers leave because there's not enough support in a certain area, the regional or someone has to be red flagged to that and waiting to ask for help or waiting to ask HR what the holdup is a barrier. So I hope we're making that turn for them. But my question is, for the schools not invited to Datacom or for these issues throughout the year, how are they asking their questions?
Well, they should be asking them through their regional, through executive directors and others who are frequently visiting their schools. You know, we target a very specific small population of schools for Datacom. I would argue that those are our most fragile, are the ones that we need to reemphasize and reinforce some leadership concepts with. But outside of that, it's an interesting question you ask, because there is always, it's not a Polk County issue. There's a reluctance of school administrators oftentimes to ask for help outside of each other, because they do feel that it's evaluative or reflective of them. It reflects poorly on their leadership. And that is a cultural shift that we're trying to make. And we're far more collaborative and supportive No means no sometimes, and that's okay. But you'll never get an answer if you don't ask. And that's something I continue to reinforce with all of our employees is, I can't fix something or try to address it if I don't know it's happening.
And I want them to reach out before the crisis is happening.
Correct. Absolutely.
So that's-
But you raise a valid, so I'll just touch on one that the example that you used, if I may. So I end up with significant staff turnover. What's the why? Is it really that those people didn't feel supported? Or is there a cultural issue on your campus? There has to be that, and that's where the knowledgeable others, the regional superintendents and others, really do focus on that reflective coaching to provide a critical lens to say, okay, but have you considered this? Is it your leadership style? We look at staff turnover on our campuses. We run climate surveys. We do those types of things to identify where the disconnect is. And it's not always the leader's fault. Sometimes it's just poor communication that leads to misunderstandings and frustrations. But to your point, if there is a specific department or unit, and I saw one of your emails recently concerning that, how then are they addressing it with us so that we can escalate the issue and we can put our eyes on it as well?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. McNaughton.
Good morning, Honorable Board Chair Allen, Honorable Board, and Superintendent. It is my honor to represent the Division of Schools and Teaching and Learning in our collective effort to improve student outcomes and enhance the quality of education in our schools. Our Division of School and Teaching and Learning leadership staff is here to help answer any questions that you have during this presentation. Okay, what are we doing to improve schools? Well, to understand the intentional actions of this year's plan, let's revisit the theme from the 2022-2023 school year, which is the kids are waiting. This theme focused on our work on building a solid educational foundation. It was sort of like an alarm went off. We needed to really set a new foundation for our way of work. Key components of that year was the Learning Arc, our standard-based instructional walkthrough tool, which was paper-based at that time, which were implemented across all schools. Now, this year's theme is I Own It. This theme is so fitting because it allows each of us to take ownership in our data and results, building off the foundation from the previous year to take action. This year is an action year and to improve student outcomes. Now, what did we do with this? Well, we started off at the end of July. We had a Division of School and Teaching and Learning retreat. We had a 2-day retreat to create action plans to improve student outcomes. Prior to the retreat, Deputy Superintendent Green, the regionals, and the Chief Academic Officer, myself, brainstormed possible initiatives. And what we did is we took those initiatives and we clustered them into focus areas, and then those focus areas were prioritized. And these are the ones that we came up with, these 5. Now, a work group lead was selected for each of the 5 areas. Prior to the retreat, the leads were brought to be trained on their responsibilities, not only during the retreat, but during the school year. They will be the lead throughout the year. They will have a small team that will work on this and provide updates monthly. To kick off the retreat, we analyzed data from the previous school year. Superintendent Hyde and Deputy Superintendent Green were leading that work. Then we divided in our 5 subgroups to create action plans similar to what is shown. During our Division of Schools and Teaching and Learning meetings, the team leads provide updates on the progress of each action. Today's presentation will highlight the initiatives for each of these areas. Now, building off that idea of theme of I Own It. Before the school year even started, our Division of Schools and Teaching and Learning leadership took that theme to heart. Our Division of School and Teaching and Learning staff evaluations are based on school performance. We own our school's performance, and our students' performance will drive our evaluations. So what is shown here is an example of a regional area superintendent has 3 performance goals, and they set the numbers and percentages, but it's based off of three things. It's based off the goal to increase the number of high-performing schools, the goal of decreasing the number of low-performing schools, and an overall goal on school grade points. So what happens is the actions of the school, the results of the school, that's their evaluation. We're owning our own data here. Okay, to start off, the Learning Arc Support Team is an initiative for the Instructional Practices Learning Arc area that aims to provide extra support to schools in need of planning assistance. The program is designed to help schools create a more effective learning environment by providing weekly support to selected schools. The program is currently supporting 14 schools which were selected by the regional area superintendents. Members of the Division of Schools and Teaching and Learning, like senior coordinators, curriculum specialists, senior directors, ESOL staff, ESE staff, were assigned schools and provide collaborative planning support. Now, this could include support with creating or selecting instructional tasks, assessments, and equivalent experiences, but it also as well classroom instructional support, which includes modeling of lessons and instructional coaching. So what we've done is we've really put our resources in where we need this support. Now, to help monitor a successful implementation of this, a form and dashboard were created using Qualtrics. A member of the support team completes the form to record the benchmark plan, the date the task, assessment, and equivalent experience is going to be introduced to students. Now, the results in the dashboard are compared to the upcoming standards-based instructional walkthrough to ensure that students are experiencing the materials worked on in planning. In the next couple weeks, I will go to each of the 14 schools and we'll do a data chat and we'll look at their data and look at any changes that need to be made for the second half of the year. Now, that's for working with our Tier 1. Now, what happens if students need additional support? So now we're switching into instructional practices with interventions in small groups. So during the 22-23 school year, the district reviewed many intervention programs across the district. And after the review, the following programs were selected. We had corrective reading in grades 3 through 10. We had number worlds for mathematics in grades 3 through 5, and Math 180 in grades 6 through 10. This year, we added reading mastery for grades K through 2, and we expanded number worlds from grades 3 through 5 to K through 5. To monitor the implementation of corrective reading, a Qualtrics walkthrough dashboard was created for this school year. The dashboard is designed to provide a comprehensive view of the program's implementation and progress. It is expected that the dashboard will help identify areas where the implementation can be improved and valuable insight to the effectiveness of the program. So right here, I just want to show you, this is how many schools we had last year in each of the programs, intervention programs, how many we have this year. But I really want you to look at the staff trained. That's over 2,000 staff members trained on really supporting, those gaps that students have with intervention and to try to get them out of that. So it's a huge initiative with a lot of monitoring and going involved with it. The second part of this is the small groups. Creating small groups emphasizes the utilization of data to ensure students receive the necessary support they need. The presentation, Fast and Follow Through, Owning Your Own Data to Increase Student Outcomes, was delivered to all administrators at the Summer Leadership Academy. And then it was delivered to our school-based coaches during a coach meeting. The aim is to offer guidance on accessing and utilizing student data to aid teachers in forming effective small groups. Our ongoing focus with grades K through 2 involves identifying schools currently using reading mastery to leverage data for the formation of small groups with specific emphasis on foundational reading skills. Another initiative, now we're switching to the leadership group, is the PLC and planning agenda. The regional assistant superintendents selected 18 schools to pilot the implementation of the PLC and planning agendas. To ensure that agendas met the district expectation, a minimum standards document was created for the PLCs and planning meeting agendas. Members of the Division of Schools and teaching and learning staff met twice with the pilot schools principals to ensure that their agendas met the minimum standards. The other district schools were trained at the December 7th principals meeting. This initiative is expected to assist schools in a more efficient and productive PLC and planning meetings. This one is real exciting, the Ignite Leadership Program. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
Probably best that we address questions as we go through.
Sure, of course.
Mr. Sharpless?
Sure. So, thank you for being here to present this to us. I talked to many teachers, and my question is really more, what is the evidence behind some of this? Like, what is the data that's coming in showing that this is effective? And so the most complaints I get, I'm just going to be blunt with you, is on the learning arcs and the the instructional reviews. Okay, and so teaching is a science, but it's also an art. And so the feedback I get from teachers is that they feel, how can I say this? I don't think this is, I'm going to say this strongly, but I don't mean this as strong. They feel deprofessionalized somewhat with some of these. And so my question is, I'm all about student achievement. I'm all about getting the data. And so where are we seeing the implementation of this improving student outcomes? That's my big question, because if it is, then I can understand some of this. But if not, it might be a problem with retention of teachers if they don't feel like they are being valued as a professional.
I'll be happy to answer that, actually. Number one, yes, we are seeing schools improve as a direct result of these strategies and these supports. When I got here, 7 F schools, 0 F schools right now, 42 D schools, 9 right now. The number of schools that improve from Fs to Ds have all maintained that status as a result. Instructional practice, to your point, as much as there's an art to teaching, we don't try and influence how you arrive at teaching a topic. We will absolutely manage and control what needs to be taught, the depth of and the mutual experiences our students must have as it relates, so that one teacher doesn't teach it differently than another teacher. Those equivalent experiences are incredibly important. I don't care, again, what strategy you use to teach it, but the outcome has to be the same. The expectation has to be the same. And I would hold up our district data and some of our school level data and say, show me where efficacy has been when 30% of our kids are reading on grade level. Tell me that we don't have a need to improve instructional practices in the classroom. And so instructional reviews were something that the state of Florida developed a number of years ago to ensure that the instructional practices focused on appropriate grade level standards, not what we want to teach, but what the state expects us to teach. Because let me tell you, it is not uncommon for someone to derail and focus on a topic I prefer to teach. It's not even in my grade level expectations, but I want to teach planets in 3rd grade instead of life science. And so the instructional review process solidifies that we are seeing the level of instruction and the specificity of content that's going to be expected for our students to be assessed on. The other part of it, the learning arcs, ensures that our lesson plans are addressing these issues comprehensively and taking into consideration the majority of needs of our students who otherwise go ignored. Look at our EL population data outcomes. Look at our ESE population student data. Those students share a classroom with other gen ed students, and yet they don't have an equivalent experience or an equivalent outcome as their peers. Our job, again, is not to basically dictate how to teach. We will dictate and we will outline and we will finalize and reinforce the expectation of what needs to be taught and to what specific depth of understanding. So our instructional pacing guides and all of those things are important. I'll go back again to PM1 data, and I will be more than happy to send you the entire district's data. You'll be shocked at how low some of our classrooms performed. Schools performed. 1% of kids in 3rd grade, 4% of kids in 4th grade, 4% of kids in 5th grade scoring on grade level in mathematics. It's not possible. So to those who would say that, they need to be more reflective in their practice. And here's what's going to happen, because we're in a process now of vetting this, because we don't have this option right now. If you were to ask me, Mr. Hyde, you taught biology last year, or you went to Mr. McNaughton, better yet. Mr. Hyde taught biology last year. I'm getting a lot of complaints out of the high school about Mr. Hyde's instruction. Can you tell me how many kids passed the EOC, or how many kids passed the statewide assessment, or our own quarterly assessments? Can't tell you that. We will soon. We will absolutely be able to identify whose students are outperforming other students. Not to be punitive, but this is where coaching comes in. If we don't know who our high-performing teachers are, or we don't have the ability to identify where teachers are struggling, then how do we know who to coach and how to address it? How do we know which teachers to place in certain classrooms because they actually have better student outcomes than their peers? Just a better teacher when it comes to certain content. That happens. That's a reality in our schools. And so for those that want to continue to push back, there's no micromanagement here, but there are honest conversations about what the expectations are in schools. And so, you know, I've dealt with this conversation myself. Ms. Yoakum was brought into the fold. Our PEA was brought into the fold. They walk classrooms with us. I will send you the classroom walkthrough observation data today so that you yourselves can look at when we're walking classrooms. One of the most discouraging data points that we have is how frequently we're doing checks for understanding throughout our lessons. It's virtually non-existent in the majority of our schools that we're walking through. We're not checking to make sure that kids understand what we're teaching that day, other than an assessment. We don't even do that many formative and summative assessments. I could show you grade books where there's less than one grade being entered into the grade book per week. How are we really evaluating student outcomes? I'm glad you asked the question, and I'm going to speak candidly, because this is not reflective of every person practicing in our classrooms, but there are those that are. And as a direct result, if you don't assess students more frequently, formatively or summatively, you don't know where they are. And more importantly, are we trying to get through the pacing guide to cover all of our topics? Or are we trying to teach the mastery and identifying where there are instructional gaps for our kids and then reinforcing those areas? So, and this was the conversation we had yesterday in Datacom. If our pacing guide, because we had several principals talk about the fact that their teachers were 2 or 3 weeks off the pacing guide. And I asked the question of Sandy and well, Mr. McNaughton had to step out, but of Sandy and the team to say, do we need to adjust the pacing guide? Are we expecting too much too quickly? Because if our expectation, I want to be clear, my expectation is not that we cover content. My expectation is we teach students to mastery. And that means we're going to fall behind from time to time because there are skill gaps that students may not have. And then once they attain that, you'll see some exponential leaps in growth. But until we address those disparities in their background knowledge and their understanding, their ability to apply learning or concepts, we're going to have some struggles. So are we asking too much of our pacing guides? And so that's the conversation we're going to have. How do we adjust our quarterly assessments? Because our quarterly assessments that we administer give us a strong indication of where we are in pacing, because what several principals yesterday and on Friday shared with us was, listen, Mr. Hyde, our data's off here, but when we talked with our teachers, part of the problem was when we looked at the questions that students missed, we hadn't taught that yet. Well, that data doesn't benefit us, right? It doesn't, because it's giving us a false narrative about student outcome. And so the question was, can we refine that system somehow so that when we get feedback, we know how far off the pacing guide someone is? Because that should be a conversation between their administrator and the teacher to say, why are we falling behind? is there something I can do to help? Do you need a para? Do you need us to do something different with supports? I mean, do you want to co-teach with someone to get caught up? I mean, what are the real issues? Is it a student gap in knowledge? Or was that teacher absent for 2 weeks due to a medical issue? I mean, any number of reasons can impact the pacing guide or the pacing in the classroom. So there's a lot of benefit that comes from this. And so for those that feel frustrated by the process, I'm glad they're voicing that. And I would hope that they'd take the time to connect with their administrator and with others to develop a better understanding of the why. Because none of this looks at individual teachers. None of it. We look exponentially at the entire department or grade level or school to to arrive at a determination as to where they need assistance. That we don't talk about individual teachers. It's not evaluative. They are told when we first implemented this process, and both Mr. Green and I worked at the state level, and those were one of the early lessons you learned, was that if you talked about a teacher, it derails the entire process. Because then it's viewed punitively and it's evaluative and it's a criticism, and that's not the intent. The intent is to look holistically at a school or at a department or at a grade level and say, what does it look like? And where are some areas for opportunities for improvement and growth? So I'm very happy you asked the question. Don't ever be reluctant to just speak candidly. I'm going to be honest because, as you know, I'm going to respond candidly. And I appreciate you trying to couch the question, but you don't need to do that, Mr. Sharpless, because this is a point of contention for some, and we want to be able to address it.
So just as a follow-up then, the learning arcs and instructional reviews are, they're not demanding that a teacher teach a certain way or a certain method. It's more of what the topic they are covering. And so as long as we are within that, they still have the flexibility to teach it how they want to teach it.
Other than an explicit reading type of reading or math intervention where they must follow the programmatic approach, no. You could teach, let me pick a topic that's not going to create a stir here. I tend to always default to my science background. And so you may teach volcanoes one way, the 3 different types of volcanoes. I'm going to teach it a different way. I may do it more hands-on with modeling. You're going to do it more with traditional note-taking and videos and other reinforcement. The intent is, are we both covering the standard? Do students understand that there are 3 types of volcanoes, why they're different, those types of things? It doesn't matter how you teach it. It's just a matter that you do teach it. So we don't try and impact the art of teaching. We do talk about best practices now. I mean, don't get me wrong. Some practices have a better research methodology and background and outcomes than others. And obviously, we want to provide those tools to teachers, especially those who are like, well, I keep teaching this unit, my kids just aren't getting it. Well, that's where lesson study and other types of strategies come into play because they can bounce ideas off their peers who might be being more successful, and then they in turn can model that or do other things. And we do a lot of that gradual release with our staff, where we come in, we model, we co-teach, and then we release it to the teacher. They then teach the last lessons of the day, and then there's a dialogue between the two. How do you feel? How did the outcome change? So it's a really comprehensive answer to your question, but I'm glad it came up, quite frankly. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And really, just to go through it, the learning arc is based off of 2 different areas. There's one of the understanding, it's like a professional development of what the benchmark, what are the expectations of the state. And as the group, as the team that's planning, how are we going to break that up into objectives? So it's really an understanding piece. The other part is actually what you teach, not how you teach it. It's what tasks are aligned to the objectives I wrote from that benchmark. What assessments, formative and summative, that we're going to use for that benchmark. And then what equivalent experience, since all our assessments right now are going to be computerized, what am I going to give them? What is it going to look like? And so the idea of how to teach, I'm on one of the teams. I'm missing Kathleen Elementary's math planning today. I own it. It's one of my schools. I'm going to make sure that they're successful this year. One of the teachers, she had this grandiose plan of a right before break about, I want to teach this by traveling. Okay, so let's come up. We couldn't find a task. So I said, well, let's work together on one. So we made a task that related to her objectives that related to how she wanted to teach it. So there's a lot of flexibility in there, but the biggest component I want to understand is like, it is all stemmed on what the state intention of the benchmark is. So it's all benchmark. It's not, I want to teach a Johnny Appleseed lesson just because I like Johnny Appleseed. It's all based on benchmarks.
Thank you.
Oh, no problem.
Ms. Miller?
I just have a question, and that reminded me of something, because I was at a school that was doing something really well with their third graders on a certain subject, and I thought, how do we get other schools to get this? This might help them, like, teach the concept that these people were doing. Is there a time where that's shared either regionally or?
There's a couple ways I could go with that. First of all, is right within Schoology itself. Each of the content areas has feedback forms, and they show some of their successes on it. So they can say, hey, this worked really well. But we also have our senior coordinators who are out at the schools who also share that information with it. So there's normally a lot of communication at coach meetings. So there's various different ways that could get through. And really just one-on-one interactions. A lot of times we'll get from teachers like, hey, this really worked well. What do you think about it? And they'll send it directly to the curriculum specialist. So there's many avenues, and it's very open to have that. A success at one place could be a success all across the
100%.
district.
And when you
so.
have that really creative teacher, so I'm wondering how often that Schoology is utilized. Because I do a lot of school visits, and when I put on social media, the feedback I get is, I wish we did that. I wish my teacher could do that. They absolutely can. I don't know if they feel limited in certain, depends who your leadership is at the school. But some of the ideas are so creative, like Mr. Sharpless mentioned, and we want to be able to share those, especially in content areas that are struggling. And so I'm looking forward to sharing ideas, because even magnet schools, traditional neighborhood schools, are doing things that sometimes our magnets aren't exposed to. But if they knew about it, I think they would. I do have a question, and it might be for the superintendent. I don't like sitting next to him because then I have to look at him, like with my question, like some kind of. I don't like to. It's weird. Anyways, my question is, some things came out yesterday in plannings, and I've already heard from a few principals that I might be hearing from teachers about how the report, and I can tell you lessons plans specifically, and I can tell you as a teacher who worked for a principal who was very knowledgeable, but when we are having teachers complete multiple tasks with the same data, it does drive down morale. So when you're doing these data, when you're doing all of the data things, we're just going to lump them all together. I'm sure they're not lumped all together. I want to make sure it's meaningful and it's just not copying the same data 3 or 4 times, because you will lose people in doing that. And something was announced yesterday that I was learning more about with how they're going to do lesson plans. And I want to make sure that the teachers, and sometimes it's the way it's rolled out. The teachers might not, what you just explained earlier, maybe they don't hear that or they don't know that. And they're looking at, I'm asked this repetitive task over and over again, let me teach. And so how are we doing with that?
So I think you're referring to learning arcs.
Yeah, I'm going backwards.
Yeah, and so with learning arcs, we've had conversations about the frequency in which they need to be done. Because again, the focus is on the strategy and its utilization and not necessarily having to script out every single lesson. And I think for veteran staff in particular, who feel like they have already defined a way of work, it can be frustrating to feel like they're going back and reinventing the wheel. However, in the same regard, we've had multiple of those individuals come back and say, I didn't realize I wasn't teaching it to the level that students would be assessed, right? So even though you can cover the standard, ensuring that students can apply the standard at the level in which the state's going to assess them, that's more oftentimes the gap that we're finding. And so what this conversation is allowing is a little more formative process. And I'll go back to PLCs, professional learning communities. School districts have been doing PLCs for more than 15 years. More oftentimes than not, when they do their self-evaluation, or you end up having an evaluation of PLCs conducted in your district, you know what you hear a lot of the feedback is? It's lip service. You do it, but you don't do it well. What learning arcs do is really, it just reinforces professional learning communities. Are we talking about instruction, instructional outcomes, and how do we improve it so we make sure that we're teaching it the right way, to the level in which students are expected to access the data or be able to assess and respond to it on assessments, whether it's our assessments or state assessment. Even in non-tested areas, are we creating a skill gap because we're not covering the content appropriately? So I think there's a lot to that question. and it's the opportunity is there. But I will tell you that through Datacom, I'll go back to that. Multiple principals commented that they were sending their teams to other schools because the school has better practices. I made connections in the room for principals saying, wow, you did a great job. Your science data in particular improved, because science tends to be an area where we've seen some steady decline. Your science data looks phenomenal. What are you doing differently? And they talked about their teachers, and I pointed them out to other rooms. I said, part of the benefit of Datacom is you may be frustrated having to sit here all day listening to other people present, but you should be taking notes and stealing ideas from each other. Brad Tarver is another great example, along with his replacement at Moon Middle School. They have a 79% acceleration point score at that school. The next closest school is in the low 60s at best. So they've created a culture, and I said to the team, and Tracy Collins is tasked with doing this, I want the two of them to present at the next middle school principals meeting when they do their breakout to talk about how they created that culture and what they've done and what the principal has been able to reinforce since he's been there, because he's maintained that 79 points, is exceptional. And he said, our math teachers make it a competition. They compete with our kids. They compete with each other. It's an expectation our kids will pass the Algebra 1 EOC and the Geometry EOCs. And arguably, you could look at their demographic group, and many would assume that that's going to be a school that's not performing adequately there. They're doing an amazing job. I want them sharing out with other principals. And so anytime we find opportunities like that to share, we need to highlight that, because the skills are out there, and those talented individuals are out there. We just have to be able to tap into them and make those connections for others so that they can present. And we do a lot of that, too, through the PD department and for our curriculum directors and others. When they identify high flyers, they bring them into their professional development seminars and have them share out and do breakout sessions and those types of things. Because it doesn't need to just come from us. It needs to, from their peers, is the best possible strategy for them to reinforce their instructional practices and pedagogy. So we do highlight those opportunities.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And just to highlight something.
Hang on, Ms. Fields, let me get Ms. Fields, and then you can go, Mr. Menon.
I just wanted to say that best practices is what it's all about. And I know that our regionals do a great job with that. And one specifically that I know from firsthand experience is Dr. Henry. And when going on campuses and seeing some great things that's occurring, being able to share that with others. I do have a question. The slides are not numbered, and this is a regional assistant superintendent question. For the Learning Arts support team and for the PLC and planning agenda, you referenced that the regionals select 14 schools
14.
for the support teams, ARC, and then 18, I think you said, for the other. And so my question is, how do they determine what schools need to have that support?
In the knowledge, I don't know if any of the regionals want to come down, but
Dr. Henry, since you were named, why don't you come on down?
Good morning, good morning, good morning. One of the way we support our schools is, as region, we at all our schools, and we tier our school based on the needs of the school. So when we have a new principal, we're looking at the data from the school, we might see that certain school need more support. So when we did our art team, we've seen a lot of our school that historically didn't have good school data, so we wanted to provide that level of support to make sure that we start moving those schools in the right direction. And with our PLC agenda initiative that we are working on right now, same level, we look at the support that we have at the school and want to make sure we provide adequate support to these principals and to the school to make sure we are moving the school in the right direction.
And so that's 14 for the ARC and then 18
Yes,
per
ma'am.
regional?
Yes, ma'am, but even with the learning, with the planning agenda, we started with the 18 school, but then we end up training all of our principals at our last principal meeting on it. We started out with a small pilot of certain schools that we wanted to work out, doing this initiative with the agenda to make sure that we are getting the right intent behind this plan. And so when we got this going, then we was able to bring other schools on. And one of the things we did when we came back on January 2nd, We reviewed all of these different agenda to make sure that what Mr. Menard said had those minimal standard. And then as a regional team, all our region will be going back out to these schools to support these schools with planning and PLC to make sure that they are following through with the agenda, making sure we're getting the best out of our teacher time since we had limited time with our teachers.
Thank you.
Welcome.
And Mr. Nolte.
Good morning. As I listened to all this conversation, since I had over 36 years experience in the public school system, there's some great teachers out there, and there's no really one way of doing it. I've seen some teachers that were very to the point, and I thought, well, you know, they aren't doing a lot of, the entertainment, but those kids scored so well, and they were excellent. Then I've seen some teachers that really put some neat, like the volcanoes and the things in, and I said, wow, this is really neat. The kids are really into it. Not every time they got the best test scores. So I think the bottom line is we all need to work together. I know some teachers, they like to be, you know, get that hug, warm, fuzzy. Other of us, like, we're going to do our job, we're going to do the best we can, and, you know, go ahead and give somebody else a warm, fuzzy that may need it. Everybody's different, and I think we all need to, you know, understand that, and I know the principals do. Of course, we all have good days and bad days, as we all do. Just work together and share your good experiences. There's a lot of different ways to skin a cat. And as long as we're all on the same page, we're all striving to get these students a super education and get the job done and do the best you can. And I appreciate, Mr. Hyde, your bluntness and tell it the way it is, because I like that. I like the way, you know, you just tell it the way it is. If it's not a nice, clean horse that's running through the pasture and it fell in a mud puddle, okay, well, you know, I like your honesty. That's great. I think we all need to be that way with each other, and everybody keep up the good work. Thank you.
All right, Mr. McNaughton, you're good.
Okay. And really, I wanted to expound on something that you said, Superintendent Hyde, about, you know, when we go ahead and a teacher go ahead and teaches part of a benchmark and goes ahead and gives a task. It's not, we just did it, check, I did my work and I can continue on. What this process of the PLC and planning, what happens is at the end of a planning session, one of the questions right at the end, it's a minute or two. What either student work or student data are we going to look at the PLC? So what happens after we do a planning session, it leads to a PLC. The results of the PLC then lead to better planning. And then it's a cyclic. It's not two separate isolated parts. It's all one flows. So we look at student data. We're analyzing, what did our kids do? What do we need to do better? What do we need to improve on? Or it could be this. What are we succeeding on? Because it's also been mentioned there's good things going on. Like if me and Mr. Hyde are on the same team and his kids are scoring so much higher than me, what can I learn from his classroom? Can I go in with the coach and find out that part of it? It's that professional growth piece, because we're professionals here. And I think that's the key, that we're trying to have that with our planning and PLCs, that they're cyclic. And it's all about growth, not just student growth, but me as a professional. So. Okay, the Ignite Leadership Program is designed to target the development of high-performing leaders to meet the future Polk County Public School organizational needs in critical positions through intentional succession planning. The program is divided into three different areas, or three cohorts. The instructional leadership team, which are current principals and district leaders. There is aspiring principals and aspiring assistant principals. So there's lots of activities that they do, but generally, if we had to just talk about what's going on in each cohort, it includes job shadowing. It includes walking different schools to see, because if you've only been in one school your entire life, it's not necessarily you're going to wind up at that school. You're going to see different things at different schools, so you learn that way. It also talks about they have to facilitate professional learning activities in front of their peers. They also engage in professional learning. They are given, supported by a mentor. And in most cases, they serve as a mentor to others. So really, this is really an exciting program. We just started. And, whoops. Go through, yes. So now, also building on that is the new and novice administrator program. This is designed to provide support to administrators who are new at their role. The program is based on the time in the role and or the professional development support needs as identified by the regional assistant superintendents. Administrators who participate attend a summer academy, and then they receive monthly professional development. They also receive mentoring support and individualized feedback. So they meet after every principals meeting to do another meeting to grow their craft. And the standard-based walkthrough tool. So you mentioned you heard that probably once before. I know when we talked about Qualtrics, we talked about the standard-based walkthrough tool. So what we've done this year is we've used Qualtrics to create a data dashboard with this. And we've already you started mentioning about instructional reviews, so I'm going to go ahead and show you components of this. But what we did is we started last school year, and we started with our ILT members, our principal leaders in that, and we had them pilot this to make sure, hey, what are you looking for? What can we do? And as Superintendent Hyde said, when we do a walkthrough with this, there's no teacher names, there's no teacher rooms. It's literally what content, what grade, and that's it. And so, so this fall we implement, or over the summer, principals and assistant principals were trained on it, and so it went live this fall. At the end of December, there was over 26,000 recorded walks. Pretty impressive. So generally, this is what it looks like. So this is for the standard focus board. There's 3 components to each one. This is posted for compliance. Does it guide teaching or does it guide learning? So I know for those who have been on walks, you understand the lingo with it, but then it goes into instructional delivery. And when it talks about instructional delivery, it talks is the instruction, not as the science, but does the instruction match what the board is saying? Does it match that benchmark? Are the materials they're using, are those aligned? And are the tasks and activities aligned? And what you'll see is this year what we've really improved on as a school district is that these numbers are the highest, which is very exciting because before it would be a compliant piece on the benchmarks up on the board. Okay. That's a compliance piece. But now what we're seeing is that alignment through, when you're saying data to show growth, this is exciting. Every month, this gets higher and higher. There's more alignment. The materials that our students are seeing are aligned to benchmarks. It can be taught so many different ways. There's a myriad ways to do it. But what happened is it's aligned, and that's exciting. That Superintendent Hyde mentioned this about Datacom. This is one of the areas that we're doing, that we're working on right now, is assessing student learning. Like having the opportunity, does the student do mastery? Now this is at a school that had a better learning checks than some schools, but this is something that we're working on right now. But what happened is we know about it because we're monitoring it. We have a dashboard to at least find out what's going on, and we can make those real-time decisions now by using the data. Okay, teacher cadres. Here's another professional development that we're doing. This is a build-off for something that we did last year. Teacher leaders known as architects collaborate with district curriculum teams to craft high-quality lessons in science, social studies, and mathematics. They draw on their classroom expertise. They ensure the lessons align to the state standards and incorporate the latest pedagogical approaches. The architects provide professional development, empowering their peers to deliver enriched lessons and foster a culture of continuous improvement within the districts. So we have these teacher leaders, when we've selected them by previous their student data, how successful have they been? And we just don't do one previous year, we go back. And they work with our curriculum team on this. And this was a state grant, that's why we're using science, social studies, and mathematics, because that's what the grant said. And just to show, this is how many cadres we had. And so, for instance, if you just take a look at fifth grade, there's 160 teachers that teach fifth grade math. Of that, 65 of them are either an architect or in the cadre itself. And so all teachers were able to apply for this. Generally, this cadre took place all during the first half of the year, so they're just finishing up right now. And so we're looking at how that data is going to compare and the growth of their students in this. But all the lessons that were created were available for all teachers across the district. Instructional coach meetings. Just as a process, we want to make sure that our coaches don't get information before our instructional leaders at the school. So there is, the coach meetings are modeled after the district principal and AP meetings. So the first Thursday of the month is a principal meeting, then the following week is the AP. So what we do is we model the coaches meeting after the previous two. So it's one voice, one message, so everyone is on the same page. So we don't have two different things being discussed and there's confusion. We don't want confusion. We want to make sure there's a single message and it's there. What we've also really worked with the coaches this year, there's a focus around analyzing student work. It's great to put stuff in, bench something related to the benchmark. Whether it's a task or an assessment or an equivalent experience. But if students don't get it, what do you do? How do you analyze that work? How do you improve? What do you do for remediation? Is it small group, whole group? So we've really worked with our coaches on that for this year. I promise I'm almost done here. The Aspiring Leader Program, there's a lot of changes we've had the Aspiring Leader Program, but we really have done some updates to it. First of all, the seminar presentations, we've completely revamped that and actually doubled the amount of professional development within that for each session. And it was very strategic when we worked with the division schools and teaching and learning worked. And so to get a whole picture of what it takes to be an instructional leader in Polk County. So we've really targeted many different groups with that. We, for each of the aspiring leaders, do receive mentoring, but we really made mentoring guidelines of what mentoring should look like, because one person may think mentoring is one thing, someone thinks it's completely different. So we've standardized that. We've also have off-site visits for our aspiring leaders, so they get those shadowing experiences. And we also have a summer embedded leadership activities that our aspiring leaders are participate in. So we've added a lot more because getting out there is some of the best way of learning. Just to let you know, so before I go through the last one, which is data analysis, this is our overall school grade. And if you notice, there are some that only have 4 bars and some have 5. Just make sure, with last year being a baseline for the FAST assessment, we had no learning gains. So and you can see, there's fluctuations, some were the same, some went down, some went up. But what happened is we're data rich and sometimes information poor. Our Superintendent Hyde say that a lot during DataCom. So there was a true need for data literacy to really understand what is our data telling us. Because we can have all the data in the world, it can be accurate. But if we can't analyze it, if we don't understand it, and if we can't have our schools do this analysis, then why are we even looking at it? So this was the goal and what it stated. But really, I want to go through this part with it is What has been done is that the data initiative was launched with the aim of improving data literacy among school staff. The initiative identified a contact at each school to attend monthly meetings. The meetings covered a range of topics to help staff understand and analyze data. For instance, in session 1 in September, staff learned how to access, understand, and analyze fast progress monitoring data. And one of the most interesting things they did, and I watched this, was all of a sudden teachers at schools and some of the coaches, they kept on saying, what's a VLOOKUP on Excel? I mean, it was like, but they were starting to form their own groups and like, hey, look what you can do with this. And it was really contagious. It was great. I loved it, just sitting in on it. In session 2 in October, they learned about grade calculation and components. Session 3 in November, they learned how to navigate and analyze data from the Polk Student Information System. By attending these meetings, staff were able to improve their data literacy skills and make better use of data to support student learning. So now we're talking about data. Let's talk. Now, PM1, we're finishing up next week, and we'll get you this. But this is PM1 data for ELA from comparing last year's, the light blue bars, the green bars is this year. And the line is the state in the same time frame. I don't want you to get so caught up on looking at, wow, third grade went up a point, and fifth grade, wow, 27 to 33. That's okay, but you're missing a point of cohorts. What you should be really excited about is last year's third graders were 19% 3 and above in the beginning of the year. As fourth graders, now 29% are 3 and above. That's 10%. That's a 10% jump. I got chills on that one. That's great. And you know, if you focus so much on individual grade levels, you miss this. In grade 10, it looks like, oh, we went down a point. But no, wait. Look as a ninth grader. They were 28% 3 and above as they started, but as a 10th grader, they're at 32%. 4% is a lot. We have a lot of kids in our district. 4% is a good number. Just to talk about mathematics, I know that Superintendent Hyde mentioned it starts lower. I know in mathematics, though, every year it's different benchmarks. It's not as cyclic. But even with PM1, look at some of this growth. I mean, they have it every, grade is higher. That's good. But if you look from cohort, that's good. Like fifth grade were some high flyers last year for us and across the district. But they started as 11%, 3 and above. This year, sixth grade, they're 17%. So they're continuing that growth. So there's some good stuff going on. So if you want data to say that some of this stuff is it's working. And I'll be thrilled to show you PM2 when that comes out.
So just
yes.
So the board has some reference PM2.
Sorry.
PM2 should be completed in the next 2 weeks. So several of our schools delayed PM2 till after the winter holiday because we had done quarterly assessments going up to the winter holiday. There was a lot of assessments being included in that timeline. And I think some of the schools had heard from other schools that they felt they had more success delaying it till after winter break when students return, so they're trying that. So we should have that data. Schools have said they will wrap it up in the next 2 weeks, and then we'll be able to compile the data and provide that for you before the next, hopefully at the next meeting.
I don't know if there's any.
Ms. Fields? Ms. Fields?
So thank you for emphasizing the gains. I think it would be nice if you were to do some type of narrative statement because people looking at this immediately don't see what you see. And so being able to have something where they can reference why it might look a little bit bleak based on what we did from a year ago up until now, we are making some gains. So just a suggestion.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I just had a comment too. I appreciate your passion. I can get chill bumps too, just within your excitement around the data. And You know, I was just thinking, I mean, there's so many things in this that's so affirming, and I appreciate it. Just, it takes me back to our strategic plan around developing great leaders and teachers, and then obviously student outcomes now is where we're at, and really pushing deeply into this. Cohort-wise, 7th and 8th, I don't know if you have a analysis on that, you know, as you were talking about each cohort and the gains. And then I'm thinking, okay, well, Polk County has had probably the most exponential growth comparative to the largest, you know, top 10 school districts. And if you look at like a 4.69% growth is what we experienced from last year coming into this year, which is significant. And I'm curious where those numbers are like higher in regards to the cohorts than from last year to this year. I don't know if you have, so we say a lot about data information. I don't know if you have like a brief thought on that as well.
You know, it's something to look into. It's so hard because as soon as they come in, they're our kids. But we can look at that.
We don't, again, this goes back to why we're looking for a new data warehouse with better search capability, because, you know, when questions like that come up, you know, and Joe and Sandy Riley Hawkins are on the receiving end of all these crazy questions and data requests that I have. They're all ad hoc reports, and for them, it can be incredibly difficult. You know, if I want to know how many left-handed, redheaded kids did, you know, who are EL learners performed on an assessment, can't find that out. You know, it can be a struggle right now, and you know, I'll talk a little bit more about this because even the state hasn't finished publicizing all their data. So when I go through our goals and objectives for the year that we've established as we try to set our baselines, many of the cells are still incomplete because the DOE has not finalized their engine. But we have so many disparate data points too. So it was interesting yesterday in Datacom, in particular for a handful of our schools, when I look at their math performance, and I'm worrying that, okay, we started at 1%, and I'm not worried about the starting point. I'm worried again about, are we predisposing those students to failure because they're not going to get access to grade level questions? And then you look at their quarterly assessment data, and their quarterly assessment data shows that they're showing so much more growth. And so part of this is, when we have disparate data systems, how are we deciding which one matters most? Which one are we making a decision as to how are we informing our instructional practices? And so there's a lot more to that. So that's why, from a data warehouse perspective, we're looking for a partner who can help us design something that's going to allow us to do more drill downs for specificity of reporting. But also, one of the questions we asked as we've been interviewing these companies is, when you have outlier data, because they pride themselves on being able to pull all the data into one place. My question is, if there's a data set that's an outlier that completely contradicts the rest of the data, I don't want it included. And what's your process for excluding that? Keeping it in the database, but excluding it from the totality of the report. And that's not necessarily something that all of them have the capacity to do. So it's an ongoing process because, again, we are very data rich. We just need to become better data informed in our practices, and that supports classroom teachers to help make those decisions. And I want them to have the power to drill down and look at kids, to be able to group their students properly in real time, and not with, you know, lagging data that's 3 months old. I mean, that's our biggest concern. That's always been the concern. And that's why we're excited about the state moving to ongoing progress monitoring assessments, is with that regular feedback, our teachers can adjust their instruction and interventions for students much more timely, rather than having to wait to the end of the year to get a final report on a kid and then let's make assumptions for next year over summer. So it's a better process for us. So we're trying to get a little bit more specific, intentional in our practice with data. So, and part of that starts with where are we warehousing our data and what search functionality and featuring are we going to use. But we've also been very candid to say this is not a decision that we are going to make at our level, meaning, you know, as far as what those search features and functionality is going to be. I've been very explicit to say I want several hundred teachers at the table, and I want to hear from them what data they feel they need, And then how do we make sure that our data warehouse reports that out to them so that the end user, which more importantly is them, has access to real-time, important, relevant information to inform their changes in the practice in the classroom. So I think we're making great headway. But, you know, Mr. McNaughton is very quick to point out, year over year, we are shifting our focus away from what did third graders do last year compared to this year's third graders. I don't want this to come across as disingenuous. I don't care. But I do want to know, because this is the question you have, and we should be asking, if 60% of our third graders were not reading on grade level, where are they at as eighth graders? Where are they at as seniors? We got to close that gap. That's what matters, is year over year for that same group of students, are we seeing improvement? And obviously, we want to see the overall performance at each grade level continue to improve because our instruction's improving. But at the end of the day, we need to track students as a cohort over multiple years to make sure that we're on a positive trajectory for them and we're closing that gap. And again, unfortunately, every year, the way the state grades, it doesn't take into consideration cohort performance. It really focuses on grade level performance. But, and part of two, when you look at this slide deck, quarterly assessments, I just want to point out that the Algebra 1 and Geometry from quarter 1 to quarter 2, one of the things I've asked is that they break out high school and middle school, because middle schools perform really high because, again, they're targeting our highest performing math students. So I want you to be able to see the difference between middle school and high school outcomes as well. So those data sets for geometry and algebra will be broken out. So you'll be able to, I'll provide you an update with that as soon as I get that. So, Ms. Fields. Or was that a carryover, Ms. Fields?
Oh, I'm good.
Okay. Ms. Miller.
Can you talk a little bit more? I mean, I think a lot of people are glad to hear that we are going to, if we're going to move these students forward, let's say in elementary school that are struggling not reading on grade level, we're going to move them forward and give them more opportunities to learn with peers, what that support looks like, and even into high school where you're not going to be penalized if you need remedial, what we used to call it, reading or math, because we are losing kids from kids who struggle to read sitting in classrooms for 2 hours a day trying to learn to read. So can you talk a little bit about how that will work in the schools?
It's already happening, thank goodness. You know, Ms. McKenzie and others, Ms. McKenzie, you might as well come down. So part of what the task was this year was how do we do away with traditional reading intervention courses at high school and focus on areas more like ACT and SAT prep? Because again, the vast majority of our students who can't pass the statewide assessment pass through concordant score on the SAT or ACT, as was attested to by several of our high school principals in attendance yesterday. Angie in particular, I believe, shared that she moved over 500 students onto the on-track graduation cohort because of ACT performance, prior to and post-winter break. So they've really been focusing intentionally on that, which helps their graduation rate, but more importantly, benefits our students. So go ahead, Ms. McKenzie. You want to talk about some of the shifts?
So I think that the biggest shift is intervention shouldn't be a penalty for kids. We talked at Datacom quite a bit about, and Mr. Hyde said that kids are put in interventions and they languish there. We really haven't done anything to assess how they're progressing and then having the ability to move them out. So with corrective reading, we are actually in a meeting this afternoon. We're going to look at some of the performance data that students have had within that corrective reading program and then make decisions on whether or not that they can be moved from corrective reading into then a reading course that will support their comprehension needs. Because once we fill those decoding gaps, which is what corrective reading does at every level, there's still going to be a need for those students to have supports within a comprehension piece. So then in looking at 11th and 12th grade, we've this year looked at ACT supports. Those kids that have been languishing in the Achieve courses are now more in a Chalk Talk course, which is ACT prep. And that's how those schools have been pretty successful with getting those kids for that concordant score. So the idea is, again, is to make sure that we are looking at kids and moving them through these interventions as appropriate so that they can get to where they're eligible to have their elective again or to take courses that they're more interesting to them rather than just sitting in that intervention.
And an important point to clarify is that it's driven based off the individual student's abilities to demonstrate that they're justified for a level change. So within corrective reading, you start at A, then it goes to B1, then it goes to B2, then it goes to C, then they exit to go to Achieve 3000, or they go to Chalk Talk, depending on the school level and what they're focusing on. But part of the question that I'm very intentional in asking in Datacom and in other opportunities is, okay, you started out, I'm just going to make up a number, you started out with 100 kids in corrective level A. Now that is very low. And we're going to do a presentation for you because I need you to understand when you have a high schooler who tests into corrective level A, what that really means. And it'll break your heart to realize that we have kids in high school who are not literate at all. What letter sounds, it's bad. However, my question is, now that we're at the midpoint of the school year, how many kids have moved from A to B1? And initially I heard some comments, well, they're at lesson number X, and when they get to this lesson, then we'll reevaluate. No. And this is what I tasked Ms. McKenzie and the team to do, is work with the schools, but to identify a checklist of things that serve as a signal to our classroom teachers and to our school-based administrators that if a student meets several of these factors, move them. Keep them moved, because part of what has to happen is we have to empower kids. Think about what we've done in public education. This is not a Polk County issue. This is public education with high-stakes accountability. The kid's not reading on third grade. We threaten to retain them in third grade. We threaten to retain them in eighth grade. We threaten not to graduate them in high school. They end up forfeiting an elective class to be in a remedial reading class. The student doesn't get success because the intervention either didn't really directly address their issues, or after several years, the student doesn't care anymore, doesn't even apply themselves. And so here's the disconnect. The student has no ownership in it. They don't see the opportunity to exit the class. The harder I work, the more reward I should get. What corrective reading and these types of approaches, when we're willing to gamble, and I will absolutely gamble like this with our kids every day, is if a kid hits a certain metric, move them, because they've earned it. I don't care how many lessons they've completed. If the data suggests and other factors suggest that this kid's ready for a change of course placement, change them. This is the whole premise behind competency-based education and not seat time. I don't care about seat time. I care that we're creating opportunities for our kids to excel and for them to feel empowered to say, you know what, I'm going to ask to be retested because I think I'm doing better and I want to exit this class. Absolutely, that's the culture we want to have on our campus. If you recall, when I was first hired, we had a teacher come to a meeting and talk about an eighth grader who had every single year prior to that had scored a level 4 or level 5 in reading, but had been placed in her intensive reading class because the student had slipped to a level 1 or a level 2. We exited that kid after that meeting, but she had initially been told you can't. And I told the principal, I told others, you've got to be kidding me. This kid has a 5-year history of scoring well above grade level expectation, has one odd year, so now we're going to predispose that kid to a reading intervention class? They don't need that. They had a bad testing year. What does all the other data say? So we've got to create these opportunities for us to be practical in how we're doing this, but more importantly, how do we empower our kids to take greater ownership so that they feel like the harder I work, the more reward and incentive I get, and I can exit this class and get access to my electives again and other opportunities. And that's what we're trying to create. And so Corrective does a great job of scaffolding it, as does Achieve, but I'm very happy with the change at the high school level because we're focusing more on the ACT, SAT prep, because for those students who have been in reading intervention their whole lives, we need to do something different with them, and it's proving to be successful. So, thank you. Did that answer your whole question?
Yes, you're gonna, and this isn't, sorry.
Hang on. Yes, ma'am.
This isn't reflective of Polk County much as it is reflective of the system that brought us here, but talking to third grade teachers about, are we going to retain earlier, are we going to retain later? And from the public, how do you have students with all of this accountability? How do we have high schoolers who do not know letter sounds or able to put, how did we get there and what percentage are we looking at that are students that are that low?
Thankfully, it's not a high percentage, but when we did the initial placement diagnostics last year at several of our high schools, I've never seen Mr. Green alarmed, but he was alarmed. It was shocking to see, and these are not EL learners, these are not ESE kids. These are gen ed kids who got socially promoted and end up in this situation.
Without supports? Were they not being supported?
No, they were receiving reading intervention and different types of supports. They just weren't performing, and the reading intervention that they were placed in was arguably not relevant or substantive to address the deficiency that they had. And this was part of the shotgun approach. You know, this is why, if you recall, that one year, we did all the data analytics about all of our reading and math interventions to determine which ones actually had an effect change or cause an outcome that was measurable and demonstrable, and we went with only research-based strategies. So that's been a big shift. But, you know, and there's no, I don't want to place fault, right? But when we identify those issues, we've got to get better at how do we identify those. And so we now have flags that'll tell us if kids are not placed in their classrooms properly. We're working on graduation tracker systems that will tell us and more importantly, give guidance counselors the feedback they need that, you know, these students are on track, these students are off track, here's the class they're missing, go ahead and reschedule them for this. I mean, we're getting better and more sophisticated in our approach to this. And we need to.
I appreciate Mr. McNaughton taking this on, only because the system of social promotion and how we couldn't retain, and we had, you know, you would let them go because you're going to catch them in third grade, then you're going to let them go because we're going to catch them in eighth grade. Like, the fact that that's not how the game is being played anymore, and we're being intentional with that, I think is a huge move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mr. McNaughton, thank you, sir.
No, thank you.
Board members, as promised, it's 11:25. If we want to take a 15-minute short recess, and we'll come back at 11:40, and then I'll wrap up with the academic summary for our goals, and it will be too long because, as I shared, unfortunately, the state hasn't finished populating some of the data cells, and we hope to have that. Ms. Riley Hawkins indicated that the state has promised they'd get it done this week sometime. So I'll send you an updated file as soon as I have the new data. But there are several cells we can talk through today that are important. So thank you. Have you ever seen
I may have gotten a Blue Devil jacket yesterday, but I did not wear it.
All right.
At this time, I'd like to call this meeting back to order and turn it over to Superintendent Hyde to finish off our work session.
Thank you. Good morning once again. At this time, board members, you have both a physical copy and it was attached to the board presentation or the board docs for you this morning as well. Ms. Sandy Riley Hawkins continues to track and monitor. These are the data cells that we had agreed to establish a baseline, if you recall. So I'm going to take you through the PowerPoint here in a moment. But again, you have a hard copy. The benefit of the hard copy is I did have the time to highlight a few cells in both red and green, places where we are exceeding the established expectation already, and then red for any area where we're not. You will also see in some areas, well, for example, in some of the goal areas, we had expected a 2 percentage point improvement from the prior year, and we had a 1.8 or a 1.6 or 1.9. So we're showing some positive trajectory. Unfortunately, the one area, and I'll cover it a little bit more thoroughly here in a moment, under ACE assessments, we saw a decline in certain cells, and so we're going to have to do a little bit deeper dive there as to the why. But in the first, I don't know how to get that up on the screen there. Judd, could you pull up the PowerPoint presentation called Strategic Plan Academic Targets? Yes, sir. Is that it? Well, their part of the presentation was done, so. It was a show of force. And so, while we're setting this up, for the sake of Mr. Sharpless and Mr. Nolte, when I first arrived, we established new strategic goal objectives for measurable objectives, outcome objectives, and one of the things that we really took a great deal of consideration for was breaking everything out by demographic subgroup. You've heard me talk about this before, and we have some examples here in the district, as all school districts do, where, we take a great deal of pride in a certain performance outcome, right? So the graduation rate could be a good example. But when you drill down to look at certain demographic subgroups of students, for example, students with exceptionalities, their graduation rate does not compare to that of our gen ed students or even our EL students or others. And so the reason that we really drilled down in there is, I'm a believer that we should always celebrate, the overarching score, but that we also need to be very intentional in looking at the subgroup data to determine whether or not there's a group of our students that are being missed. And they may not be being missed. Maybe there's a reason why they're performing at a certain level that they currently are. And so I feel, as does the board, that we should provide that explanation, right? And so we will highlight those areas. And so we really drilled down. One of the reasons, and I know I've had conversations with Mr. Sharpless about this, about how the goals and objectives were established for each year. So when you look at the research base that's out there for transformation and turnaround and school reform, a 2 to 3 percentage point improvement in each demonstrable cell is considered appropriate. Anything beyond that, you will find there will be opportunities where you'll see a big spike. But as far as sustainable improvement over time, 2 to 3 percentage points is typically considered to be a good measurable outcome. Additionally, we were 12 points away from a B. And so by ensuring that we were seeing a 2 percentage point improvement each year in each of the respective cells, we would more than cover the 12 percentage points and continue to see our school district grade improve and solidify over time. I believe that this year, in the absence of growth, that we missed an opportunity to see our overall school grade improve, but we still have 2 cells we have to continue to focus on more aggressively: graduation rate and acceleration rate. Both are great outcomes or measurable outcomes of our student performance. Graduation rate, we know where our issues are, and we're addressing those. As I shared with you at the last meeting, one of our charter schools has about 500 of our students, and right now their overall graduation rate's 14%. And we are not, and I'm being very intentional in why I'm not naming the school, because quite frankly, I don't want anybody's takeaway to be that we're blaming the school. That is not accurate. And as I've shared with Cabinet, and my team can attest to this, I shared with them, as I did at the last board meeting, when you see a school that's performing that way, you have two choices. I can become overly aggressive and threaten to close them and say, you're underperforming, you're not doing a good job, but guess what? Those kids come back to us, okay? So the 500 kids don't disappear. They are kids who need to be served. The second opportunity, which is what we're going to do as a school district, is we're going to meet with that school and we're going to offer them resources. Because at the end of the day, we all serve the same kids. We serve this community of learners. We have an obligation to ensure that they're more successful. I want to hear from them why we're not being more successful. What can I do to help? Do we need to give them a coach? Do we need to give them additional resources? Do we need to help them with staffing? Do they need a different software program? What are the strategies that we can help them with? Because ultimately, their success is our success. If you recall, I shared with you that our graduation rate would go to 82% if we can improve their graduation rate and get them to basically equate to what our overall average is. So that's a big improvement. So we really do need to target these students. We talked about the other high school that has a low graduation rate. I'm proud to say that Ave Gaynor yesterday did a great job summarizing some of the strategies that we're incorporating on that campus for credit recovery and getting those students back on track. She's been working very closely with her informal mentor, which are two of our principals that are doing a great job improving their graduation outcomes. So there's an opportunity there for her because of her transition, but she's doing I anticipate that we'll see some improvement in the very near future in their overall performance. So it looks like we got the data set up, so I'll go ahead and walk through some of this. This first slide covers reading in particular. Again, the goal was for us to improve 2 percentage points once we established this year's baseline year. Unfortunately, as Ms. Sandy Riley Hawkins has indicated, the state has not finalized the Know Your Schools website. This is where we pull all of our data from. So once that's finalized, and she did receive an indication from the department that they expect that to be updated this week. So as soon as this data set is updated, you will receive a copy. I will also bring it back as part of a formal presentation moving forward. But here's a good indication, Mr. Nolte, Mr. Sharpless, and board members, as a reminder. When it comes to reading, we're looking at our ELL students. We're looking at students with disabilities. We're looking for our socioeconomic student qualifying students, those falling below the federal poverty line. We're looking at demographic subgroups, our black students, our Hispanic, our white, our Asian, multiracial, and Native American Pacific Islander, not Highlanders, excuse me. And so you'll receive the state average for this year. If you look over, right now there's TBDs in the 22-23 baseline year. That's what that's the data set we're waiting for on the state, from the state. The next area is mathematics. Same thing. We're waiting on data outcomes from the state. As soon as that is updated, we'll provide that to you. Now, in mathematics, you will note that it focuses on traditional elementary and middle school mathematics. This is not the algebra and geometry focus that is elsewhere. So we were very intentional and purposeful in how we approach this. The third data set, again, is the science background. Unfortunately, again, this is the first 4 cells are ones that we're continuing to wait on the state for to populate that data, and we expect to see that this year. Overall science performance, we should expect to see some improvements in certain areas. A lot of our schools, as we were talking through Datacom yesterday, in particular those schools that had seen pretty significant declines in their science performance, were able to explain, number one, they had to reassign a staff member. Several of them commented that they now had because of the new that we're piloting, the new site-based decision model for their staffing, they were able to basically convert one of their positions to a full-time science instructor, and their interim quarterly assessment data and their PM data is showing improvement from the prior year. So, a lot of them are implementing new strategies to help address science in particular, as well as some other content areas. A lot of them were very intentional in moving staff based off performance indicators from last year, so we should see some improvements in several areas there. The next area is social studies. Again, this is one of the 4 cells that we're waiting on the state, unfortunately, to populate the demographic data. Last one is acceleration. I'm very proud. You can see there, we don't have the college and career acceleration. That's one that we're waiting on the state, but we do have the middle school acceleration rate. And you will see, and I believe I highlighted this in your packet, it should be highlighted green because we went from a level or a performance indicator of 64% back up to 67%. And we'll wait to see what the state's average is this year. But we did see 1-year improvement that exceeded the 2 percentage points from the prior year. And again, it's an important thing to clarify. We're not talking about 2%, we're talking about 2 percentage points, because 2% is very different than 2 percentage points, right? So we're just looking at the overall value going from a 70 to a 72 or higher. That's where we would get an indicator of a yes. The next area is AP passing rate. So here, there are a lot of cells if you look at this. We talk about AP participation rates for males. We talk about the participation rate for females. And again, broken out by all of our demographic subgroups. And then more importantly, not only are we looking at participation rates, are we seeing more students gaining access to these courses, right? Are we also seeing an improvement in their overall passing rate? And in several of these areas, we did see improvement from the prior year. And so we'll wait to finalize. So you see here, we're waiting on 2 cells, the AP participation rate for ELL learners and an AP participation rate with students with disabilities. That's being finalized. And so once that data is available, we'll provide that for you. One indication here, let me give you a good indicator. So AP participation rate for Hispanic students went from 15.3 to 27.4. So there's good improvement there. We did see AP participation rates for white students decline from 61% to 49.2. However, we believe that that's been picked up in dual enrollment and other areas. So remember, this year in our baseline year, we eliminated one of our AP courses as well because of the conflict with the state and the curriculum with African American history and with other LGBTQ topics. So as a result, we shifted them to ACE or other types of opportunities on our campuses. So we'll provide that analysis for you as well. AP passing rate for males went from 43.3 to 44.9. That's one of those indicators I was telling you. We made growth, but we didn't hit the 2 percentage points. AP passing rate for females went from 38.2 to 42.3. So we met our goal there. AP passing rate for another gender, students who identify 35.4 to 41.3. AP participation or passing rate for our African American Black students went from 20.1% to 25.1%. AP passing rate for Hispanics went from 39.8 to 38.5. AP passing rate for our white students went from 40.8 to 46.7. So you're seeing there are multiple cells where we far exceeded our overall 2% increase in those areas. For the areas where we may have declined, for example, amongst our amongst our Hispanic students, for example, or our white students, no, sorry, my data's jumping all over the place. Our AP participation rates, we will have to go back and do the analysis. I do believe, again, that's because many students got reassigned into other content areas because of the elimination of AP psychology. And we'll revisit that this year when we make decisions for the next curriculum year. The IB passing rate is also in here. You see, for example, the IB participation rate for males went from 40.8 to 49.5. This is, again, why we have to do the analysis to determine did students make a transition between an AP and an IB or an ACE course because a course was eliminated or we had to provide an alternative option. IB participation rate for females went from 58.8. That declined to 50.5. Again, we need to do the analysis to determine why. Did we not have enough students qualified? Were we not aggressive enough in their placement? And this will be a drill down. It'll have to happen at each school level. For African American Black students, for participation rate, we went from 12.7 down to 12%. Participation rate for Hispanics, we went from 26.5, jumped up to 32.4. For white students, it went from 38.5, declined to 34.6. For Asian students, it went from 18.8 to 19.6. But then our passing rates improved again, and in some cells quite considerably. IB passing rate for males went from 91% to 96.6. Our IB passing rate for females went from 87.9 to 95.7. So there are some fairly significant improvements here in IB passing rate, which I believe is a strong indicator of our students, doing a great job, our teachers doing a great job, and more importantly, earning some free college credits as well. So, industry certifications, this is a topic that I've discussed with several of you privately. I know Dr. Allen and I have had conversations about this. Very happy to see overall improvements here with our passing rates in industry certifications. Not only the number, but the percentage of students did a much better job. In many cells, there are 2 cells that I'm concerned with in particular. And again, this is why we do this with this high level of intentionality. The passing rate for ELLs and students with disabilities was previously at 52.8 and 65%, and it declined to 23 and 11%. Now, I'm hoping that there's a data error in there from 2021-22, and if not, we need to do a much stronger, more aggressive dive in why we saw such a significant decline there. But part of that, too, is also determined by the numerator and denominator, so keep that in mind as well. So, for example, if it went from a cell size of 100 students down to 20 students, that has a huge impact on the outcome. So we want to make sure that when we do the analysis, we're providing you with the best and most thorough analysis we possibly can. The next cell is dual enrollment, and for our students scoring a C or higher. And so here you will see we relatively maintained. We went from a high of 87.3% to 87.9%. The next cell, Cambridge ACE passing rates. Again, very mixed results. Certain groups making considerable improvements while other groups saw some decline. We'll do the full analysis for you and provide you with an update as to this. And so this will probably come back to you, as I shared, with an update as soon as the state provides the updated data sets. And then we'll discuss this again at the next board meeting in January. So this will give you plenty of time to preview this. My hope is that we'll get that data by the end of the week and be able to give you an update in Friday's update. And in that way, you'll have plenty of time to generate any questions or ask me to further explain certain components and cells. Next is graduation rate. We're waiting for that to be finalized. We've already discussed that. So we should be able to see some improvements in multiple cells. But we'll wait for Ms. Riley Hawkins to finalize her analysis and get the final data as reported and affirmed by the state here in the next week or so. Dropout rate, it's a big focus for us as well. Just as important as our graduation rate is our dropout rate. I will say that the group that we partnered with this year, who's targeting our dropouts and trying to bring them back to have them be completers. Now, it doesn't count towards our graduation rate because the students fell outside the cohort, but they're doing a good job on a regular basis to the tune of 2 or 3 students per month that they're getting caught up and graduated. So overall, that benefits our community. There's no cost to us, as you recall, for that service. They bill the state directly, and so I'll provide you with a summary of their success to date. And then the last one is staff recruitment and retention. So our new teacher retention rate in 21-22 was 75%. It did improve in 22-23 to 77%, and our overall teacher retention rate remained static at 86%, which is a positive for us. So again, multiple cells. The goal here is to make sure that we continue to use this as a tool and establishing goals that will address your interests and needs as board members when we establish these. Part of the overarching goal is how do we maintain or how do we get back a B grade as a school district. And so this will put us on that trajectory to fill that 12-point gap and ensure that we're doing this. This also provides us with a better trajectory for our schools. Obviously, there'll be some slight tweaks to this because learning gains come back into the fray. at this school year when we get the updated statewide assessments. So if the board would like to see learning gains incorporated into this data set, it's a very comprehensive data set, as you see. It's intended to be that way. If there's other data that you feel needs to be considered and brought into this discussion, I'm very much open to this. This is why we're workshopping it today. And so I'll open it up to any questions, comments, or additional areas where you'd like me to make sure that we are providing a targeted focus, because again, the feedback is important. I want to make sure that we're reporting on data, and I know Ms. Cunningham has brought this up previously, is, we want to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so the only way to do that is to make sure that we know what it is that matters to you and matters to our community, so I can best ensure that we're providing you with that data and a timeline. So as we move forward, what we'll provide you is a calendar of when these data sets, arguably, if you recall, I did that several months ago when we were talking about school grade calculations and other things. So as we get more information from the state about what their calendar is for releasing certain data points, we'll be able to provide you an updated calendar so you know when to expect updates to this information each year. Ms. Wyatt.
Thank you. This is, the way that this is presented is very digestible, and I appreciate that greatly. A question about specifically for the acceleration. When we're looking at, many of those programs are only at a couple schools. Are we seeing disparities in the scores by school? And what are we doing to make sure that our schools, that we're not just saying, okay, there's a great IB program here, and making sure that they're equitable across the district?
Yeah, so these are the acceleration points that are largely based off EOC, completion and passing, industry certifications, things like that. So one of the things, that's why we break out the middle school acceleration points from the overall, is to make sure that we can provide it. I can drill down in this further, but to your point, we're not seeing much of a difference when it comes to some of the standard acceleration options. Dual enrollment is one where absolutely we see a lack of uniformity, which is why we've been in conversations with our local colleges, universities. We don't have the number of staff who meet the requirements as outlined by the state for them to teach the course. So the conversations we've been having with our local colleges and universities is, how do we then tap into their certified staff, bring them onto our campus? We don't want our students having to drive to the college campus. We want them in person, and they have, as a whole, agreed to the concept. And so all of our schools will be able to offer more consistent dual enrollment options, because that's not the case right now. Some schools can offer far more, other schools may be limited to one or two choices. And so we've got to create more diversity and options for our kids, and that's the approach that we're using. One of the things I like about the conversation we've been having with our colleges, universities, is that they don't want to do this long term. What they want to do is, over the 2-year period of time that we partner with them, they want to put a mechanism in place that will certify our teachers and help them meet the requirements as a result. And then therefore they can back out, and our teachers are empowered to take over those classes. And that's exactly what we want, which, I know serves all of us well, because those teachers end up increasing their earning potential, but they also are increasing their knowledge base as a result. So this continual learning option, it will benefit our students. But those and other areas are opportunities for us to continue to explore. How do we create better equity and access for all of our students across all of our schools? Because that's not the case now.
And specifically, IB and Cambridge are the two that stick out just because they're only at so many schools. Do they have any opportunities to work together with their counterparts across the district?
They do. And so I think this year, the reality of what happened with AP Psychology is a great example that in many of our schools, when we decided we weren't going to keep doing the flip-flop with AP Psychology, we just said, okay, here are your options, schools, and that's exactly what they did. And then they reached out to each other to say, hey, I hadn't taught this before, how do I do it? And they've had a great deal of success doing that. So yes, we will continue to explore and support that as an option.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Ms. Fields.
I would think that it would be very beneficial if we were to have the academic gains, the learning gains, I think, because sometimes it shows us more insight than looking at the other assessment, in my opinion.
Yes,
and then my other question to you is, did we ever do a professional strategic plan, you know, where it's laid out and we can give it to the public if they want it.
Yes, ma'am. So that is, as soon as this data set's done, and I shared a sample of a document with Dr. Allen recently of what I used to do in my previous school district. So the strategic plan will be put into an annual summary. And so, yes, that will be something that we can hand out. That will be something that will be also available in PDF form on our website.
Okay.
And we expect that that will be done here probably no later than the end of February. So it's kind of our annual report rolled in with the strategic plan, and then we'll update the data annually.
Okay.
And we'll leave it in here, as we've kind of shown here. We won't necessarily show historical data looking back anymore because so much has changed, that once the baseline's established, we'll leave the rest of the cells empty, and each year we'll just update those cells so that people can track and monitor our progress over time as well.
Correct, you can see the trend.
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. Sharpless.
Superintendent Hyde, you know, one of my passions is career technical education.
Yes, sir.
And specifically industry certifications. So I want to go back to that. And I was just curious, you said, what kind of data would we want to see? And so I was wondering if there's a way, because we have a total industry certification passing rate, can we break that down by career tech area? So that way we know, well, the business career tech is getting this certification at this passing rate versus all these different ones. That way we know where there might be some deficiencies and where there might be some areas of acceleration.
Yes, sir. So at one point during the year, I do provide that for you. I can link it to this as well.
Okay.
Because it is very specific, and Dr. Allen in particular pays a lot of attention to this area as well. While he's a higher ed guy, he's a data guy, and he loves looking at this cell. And in particular, he's quick to point out, yes, you had a 6% improvement in your overall passing rate, but that only equated to 22 kids, and that matters though,
Yes.
right? I mean, so again, we don't want to misrepresent the data. But to your point, when Mr. Cochran provides me the annual summary of industry certifications and where we went from, we more than doubled industry certifications over a year. We do break it out by area, so I'll be sure to add that here as a supplement. If you want to change the metric, that's fine. I can try and figure out a way to do it. I think it gets a little too complex if I were to look at, and let me oversimplify it. If I were to take a culinary industry certification and a construction industry certification and something else, and then I drilled down to break them all down by demographic subgroup, it's going to get unwieldy. So I can provide that as a supplement to the data set here, and then just summarize them as far as totality, if you're still comfortable with that.
Yes.
Okay.
I just want to know where we're excelling and where we may need to.
Absolutely, because we've got new programs that are emerging, like plumbing and others, that we've got to track very carefully to make sure that we're seeing an increase in enrollment, and then ultimately we need to see a passing rate that's commensurate with that.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Allen?
Yeah, so just would love to see it in a spreadsheet. If we can get the actual spreadsheet, that'll allow us to
Sure.
play with some of the data as well. The participation rates, I think Ms. White had noted that as well. So the participation rate, say, for example, with AP or IB, that participation rate is only based on the amount of students that would be enrolled at that school where that's offered, correct?
Correct. Yes, sir. The totality of the course across the district. But it will vary from school to school right now. Yes, sir.
Okay.
The best way for me to address that currently is through dual enrollment. Because if we're going to do IB expansion and Cambridge expansion, that's a comprehensive approach at a school and not something that can be done class by class. We did some of that this year because of the AP Psych issue, but what I could do, let me talk to Ms. Riley Hawkins and figure out, for example, one of my concerns right now, and I love this Excel spreadsheet, partially because I came up with it, right? So I love it because I think it's great because I did it. I worry now when I look at it, when I click on IB participation rate, regardless of the demographic subgroup, I want to be able to click on it and then ultimately see what that means at each one of our schools. Does that make sense? And then I think that helps get to some of your point, where's going to be the data set, and this goes back to Mr. Sharpless's question, that shows what do all of our schools offer so that we can ensure that everybody's offering something, but that certain students attending certain schools aren't predisposed to not getting access to a certain course or opportunity. And that's a conversation I've been having with Mr. McNaughton at length, which is, okay, I need to know what AP course offerings we're offering in each high school. And dual enrollment's a good example, and I can speak from personal experience. You know, I have a student who couldn't get a dual enrollment class this year because we were told, then what would he take next year? Because we don't have anybody to do a third dual enrollment option in ELA. And so, as a dad, as an educator, I'm like, okay, wait a second, now this is happening at my child's school. How then do I create opportunities there, not just for my kid, but for every kid? And then what's the reality at other schools? And the more we looked into this, the more we realized that there were some disparate systems there. So I need to look at this a little bit more with Ms. Riley Hawkins to determine, again, as a supplement, what other data can we give you access to? What we can provide this was initially sent to you as an Excel spreadsheet. So I'll ask Ms. Riley Hawkins to give me that, and I'll send it to you so you can have it in both formats.
Yep. And I think at the heart of that is, okay, so if I look at the IB participation rate male, for example, so that number, that percentage is just determined upon how many students actually join that IB course, in a sense, or that IB program. But what I would love to see is, let's just say, your participation in students that are enrolling in dual enrollment courses, say at Lakeland High School, is this percentage. Can we see the growth of participation in those?
Yes. We can track that. And that's the point I was trying to get at, which is how do we drill down into specificity? Yeah. And this is where the academy improvement plans will come in as a supplement as well. So yes, we can get to this data. Ms. Wyatt.
Thank you. My question goes a little bit off of what Dr. Allen was saying. So, because I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. So the participation rate is of the students participating, how many are in each category?
The total percentage of male students, just focusing on that group, who participated in an IB program or course this year as compared to year prior. Because we want to see an increasing enrollment.
Right.
And then we want to see, more importantly, not only increasing enrollment across all demographic subgroups, but we want to see increasing successful outcome.
Right. So, okay. I guess my concern with the way that it looks like it's reported is for one group to increase, another group would have to decrease? Is that not accurate? Okay.
No.
Okay. I'll get with you on the data.
Well, I know we have a meeting later, so we can.
Okay. Yes, thank you.
Okay. I apologize. We had really hoped to have all the data from the states. We could have a little bit more discussion about the first 5 cells or 5 slides. But as soon as that's updated, I will provide that to you. And we will bring that back for further discussion, because this is important. This is what we do, right? There's so much more we do as far as supporting our students and our teachers and everything else. But we are in the business of educating kids. And you heard me highlight some of our academic data. I struggle from time to time how of the big 7, of the large urban districts, of which we're number 7, when I include Pinellas County because they're number 8, because remember we passed them, and you look at all those districts, there's only 3 of us that don't have any F schools. 3, Polk County, Orange County, Miami-Dade. Everyone else saw an increase in the number of D and F schools. We continue to see a decline, and we have 0 F schools right now. And so it does frustrate me from time to time when I see that, okay, well, we're a C-graded district, and yet I happen to know that one of our largest urban districts has the most number of D and F schools, and yet they're rated as a B district. And so part of this is a conversation, right? And now, again, the math just doesn't work in our favor right now without the learning gains and some other components, but that will come. But graduation rate, again, the 2 cells that you cannot ignore at the end of the day, are graduation rate and acceleration points. We've got to do a better job in those two, and I will give tremendous credit to Mr. Green and his team, because if you look at the improvements last year in middle school acceleration and other areas of acceleration, that's directly due to them doing the master schedule reviews every summer to ensure that we're putting kids into the right classes and that schools are structuring their schools for success. And that's important. And graduation is something that, you know, I have very mixed feelings about, because I know graduation rate has to be at 80, 82% or higher in order for us to be a B district. But I also have to reassure you and our community that if you get a diploma in Polk County, it means something. You know, we're not just going to socially promote kids through graduation, and, you know, but there are a lot of pieces there that I'm excited about right now in this year's legislative session, because there's a robust conversation happening right now on a daily basis there about accountability and what really matters. And, you know, when we're investing billions of dollars into workforce, and then you have to acknowledge that the kids who you probably are trying to target are never getting access to the classes or opportunities because they're stuck in an intervention class, because they can't pass a certain test, yet they can pass the course, and they can pass through a concordance score. We need to have a different conversation about how we're evaluating student outcomes. And I think that we're in a really unique place right now in Florida, again, to revisit some of this. And I'm excited to see where the conversation may go this year. Right now, part of the conversation, just to keep you up to speed, is the EOC should matter, but it shouldn't be the end-all be-all as far as pass-fail, and that they would work to incorporate it into the overall calculation of a grade. So as an example, you pass a class with a C, you take the algebra EOC, and they average your final exam score in, maybe they say it weights 20% of your overall grade, and that student still gets a C, they pass, and they get credit. They don't have to be retained. And so there's an opportunity there for us. And right now, we've piloted the CLT in a couple of our schools. We're a little bit cautious, but right now we're getting good feedback from our high schools on it. And so we're going to be looking to expand that opportunity, because that's that third assessment that the state approved. We have some concerns with it, and I'll share those with you separately, because of the manner in which the assessment takes place. It's not done the way we do standard testing, meaning there's not the level of test security as there is with some of our existing assessments. So we'll talk more about that as I get more information, and we can share that with you. But the outcomes have been used by private schools and charter schools for years, and the state has approved it. So I think we have an obligation to provide our kids with every single opportunity to demonstrate that they can be successful and earn those graduation requirements and move on and be successful in life. But, you know, I think it's Simmons who's pushing the bill. I think his own son's narrative and story, his son, he said he wasn't magna cum laude. He was I knew I'd mess it up. He wasn't summa cum laude. His son struggled academically, and in fact, his son almost didn't graduate because some of the high-stakes accountability measures, and now his son is being incredibly successful in a welding program. And he's looking at it from that perspective, which is, my son may arguably have never gotten access to this, to move on into a career that he's truly passionate about because of this assessment, and is that fair? And how many more kids like that are out there? So it's an interesting conversation and narrative that's developing at the state level, and I'm excited to see where it may go. Because anytime you can challenge the current status quo is a good thing, right? It doesn't, change is positive. It forces us to reflect and redirect and renew our emphasis on certain things. So I'm excited, again, like I said, to see where it goes. But that's all of the presentation for today. I appreciate your time. I'll take your feedback, see what we can do to incorporate this, and as I shared, we'll update any data sets for you in between. Mr. Green said that they were wrapping up some data comms on Friday. I'll make sure I verify some of that. If you haven't had an opportunity to do an instructional review, I'll speak to Mr. Green to determine whether or not you can join him and a team on one of those. I think it'd be a unique opportunity for you to put some eyes on instruction and see how we capture that data and how we report it out and how the schools utilize it. And that's important for us. You know, is the standard posted? Do students understand what's being taught? Are we doing frequent checks for comprehension and understanding throughout the lesson, rather than just assuming? And by frequent checks of comprehension, we mean of the class. You know, not just the one kid who always raises their hand and always has the correct answer. Because if you're basing your assumption on the class's understanding on one student, it's a false assumption. So I think there's lots of opportunities for us. Board members, there'll also be an opportunity coming before you. I reached out to you prior to the winter holiday. We were getting ready to plan out several book readings. If you recall, I read those books. We bring in all the props, and we challenge kids to answer questions or submit things. And several of you indicated an interest in joining to do that. So I'll be reaching out to you and all of you to remind you of those opportunities. And then they'll set it up here. We tape everything here. I think you'll have a great time with it. And so again, if you have an interest in that, we're trying to create multiple opportunities, looking at what remaining holidays and events we have coming up so that we can focus on those, okay? And then last thing, since we will not meet, I know Ms. Fields has inquired, but we do have several high schools bands that will be joining and participating in local MLK parade events. And so we want to make sure that we're highlighting that on, I believe it's this Thursday. We are hosting the event for the MLK speech or essay competition. And just as we did last year, we'll make sure to bring any winners to a school board meeting so they can be acknowledged for that upcoming event and holiday. So thank you very much for your time today. Dr. Allen, there is no staffing or district updates. Mr. Pitts has requested that we delay that to the next meeting. And so that concludes all of my components for today's presentation.
All right, thank you so much, Superintendent Hyde. I really appreciate the focus on academics today. A good time to focus on that as we're in the middle of the school year. And just as a reminder, you know, we are approximately 6 months into Superintendent Hyde's evaluation process. So if you look at his contract, typically, and I know we just completed it, we haven't even seen last year's evaluation, and I'm sure you're going to bring that forward soon. But based in the contract, it says that we're supposed to have his evaluation completed in September. And I know that in the past, we've also talked about the opportunity to address adjustments to compensation as it relates to performance-based increases as well. And, you know, we've just seen some metrics here today. I think that's this should be part of that conversation from my perspective as a chair. So I want to put that out there for you to churn on a bit as well. Last time, a couple things were brought before you as well, which was the potential for some feedback on a staff, board manual. I know you've seen some examples, and Ms. Savette's going to be working on that. If you have feedback, if you look at those examples and you're like, I really like, what was in that document, would love that to be a part of our board document, you can send that Yvette's way, and be sure to copy Mr. Bridges on that. Just to really wrap up, the focus of our old business is to make sure that we address our committee assignments, and I did put a feeler out there for feedback from you. Ms. Yvette collected that, and we'll just go through these, and if you have things that you would like to address, bring that forward at this time. So I did get feedback from Ms. Cunningham that she would like to continue on the Audit and Finance Committee. Currently, Rick Nolte, you're serving as our board representative on the sales tax oversight, so that's where we're currently at. I've heard feedback from Ms. Miller in regards to Polk County Head Start, with the opportunity if somebody else wanted to jump in and serve in that capacity, it would be beneficial. So I haven't heard feedback of anybody that would like to take part in that committee.
I'm more than willing to stay on it, but it's a great word.
Okay. Anybody else have interest in that? Polk County Head Start? Okay. We'll keep you going on that one. Thank you, Ms. Miller. And then, as noted last time, just the Polk Education Foundation, how that one historically has been handled is it would rotate to the next district. So Ms. Miller had been serving in that role this past year, so it would then rotate up to District 1, and that's how we historically handled it. So if anybody, wants to oppose that, but just wanted to give that historical perspective as well. We were trying to lock in who serves currently on the calendar committee, and I think that would be, yep. Mm-hmm. And I know it was a question mark there.
I think there was only one held.
Mm-hmm. So
I don't mind, that one's fine as well, unless someone else wants to serve on the calendar.
anybody, any takers on that one?
I'm happy to do it if Ms. Miller doesn't want to, but.
Yeah, well, I mean, she's serving a lot. I mean, you are I was just looking at our committee engagement. Ms. Miller, you're serving on 5 of our committees, so I really appreciate your service.
Mr. Beth is more than welcome to be on calendar. It's one of the ones with a fewer commitment to actual in-person meetings.
I think the thing with the calendar committee, if my memory serves me correctly, is that last year, the information came after the meeting.
That's what happened.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so if it's going to be before the meeting, it's great, but if it's after the meeting, it serves no viable purpose.
True.
Yeah. So you're
I was
interested?
just going to say, I think too, that may have been a little bit of a timing. I don't know when that committee typically meets, but I think it met in December last year, which was
School
right
calendar committee?
as, yes. I think it met in December last year, which was right as the committee appointments were being done. So that's one that we may, I don't know if we need to look at the timing of when that person changes over, just so it's not a, you're assigned to this committee that's meeting in 20 minutes type deal. But I'm happy to serve on it.
Yep.
Brian, do we have a date in mind for calendar committee coming up? Okay. Okay.
All right, good. So, Ms. Y, I've got some interest there, and I'll note that. Ms. Miller, you've been serving on the insurance committee that you were appointed May of 2023. So, at this point,
I'm pretty vested in that one. And so I would like to remain on that committee.
all right, very good. And we have 2 committees. One, Ms. Fields noted as Facilities and Operations Committee, and then myself on Academics. Superintendent Hyde, I know there's been discussion on those 2 new committees. Currently, they have not met and are not meeting. Just wanted to bring that forward to you, so you're aware of that as well. And then from there, Mr. Sharpless, you're currently serving your 2-year term within the Polk Vision Operating Board. We do have the Board of Directors that I'm serving on currently. It's a 2-year term that goes, and this would be with the FSBA. Ms. Fields, you're serving within the FSBA advocacy.
Correct.
Yep. Any adjustments there? You feel confident in that one? It's a 2-year commitment. Was voted in June 13th of 2023.
Yes, nothing much has happened yet, but whenever it happens.
All right, very good. And Mr. Nolte, you're serving with the Central Florida School Board Coalition. I know they just went through. All right.
The tax thing, right?
All right, very good. And then I'm serving on Junior Achievement. So any other major changes or adjustments at this point?
I'm serving on the Health Strategy Insurance Committee.
There's 2 committees.
It's 2 separate committees. So
Okay.
that's something that I need to continue to serve on.
All right, very good.
I have one quick question. So P, is there any other ones that roll over? Like JA, what is that? Is that a term limited? Is that a rollover? Are there any other ones? And I'd sent you one that's not on this list that I had been serving on, transportation with the county. If anybody wants to get experience in that, it's the disadvantaged transportation. It's where Polk County sits. Your backup is Rob Davis's office. But it has to do with a lot of Citrus Connection and what we're doing with students. So if anybody's interested in that, I don't mind someone else serving, or I can continue. It's fine.
Is that the full TPO board?
No, it's the disadvantaged transportation part of.
I've heard of that.
Yes, ma'am. It was vacant when I got here, and I had somehow was in a meeting where it was brought up, and I had asked about it. And so I sat in on those meetings, but it's City of Winter Haven, it's Mayor, well, it was Mayor Birdsong for a while. But it's agencies that deal with underserved populations, so elderly, disabled, and education fits in there because of the Title I status of most of our students.
One of those meetings.
They meet on Monday. When they meet, I think it's a quarterly meeting, and it's 1:30 in the county commission's office.
Okay. If you can get that one, we can add it to our list as well. If you notice, I'm starting to add some things in board docs as well under the library section. So these will be listed there, so you can always see where we're at and where we're serving. The other thing is there are related policies to our committee appointments that we make, and then committees in general. And, it's a good opportunity for us to evaluate those policies, and if you have recommendations of changes that you would like to see to those policies, please bring those forward as well.
Hey, Dr. Allen, City of Winter Haven did their reappointments last night at their commission meeting, and they had a great document that had what the committee was, who was serving, if it was a policy established, what the policy number was, so they could refer back to it, and then also who the contact person was, whether it was a staff member or if it's an external organization. But when I saw it, I thought, man, this looks, why reinvent the wheel? So I'll send it to Yvette to see if it's something that we want to look at.
And that could be added to our board manual, indeed. All right?
I'm sorry, were there any other committees that we need to follow procedures on that I haven't read the policy on? Or is this all of them? Because I don't know if, like PEF, we didn't know that. I think you had to do some research. I didn't know that that's how it was working. So I'm glad you're putting it all in one location so we can see it.
That was the way it always was, but I think last year we had discussion on that, and Sarah Beth decided that she wanted to do something different.
Yeah, because we didn't have someone.
Yeah, we always had it like that. 'Cause it was
Susan and
our
I
turn
did a
to
lot
do
of
that.
digging to find.
What it was?
Is there, how did this start?
don't
Is this
know.
policy, or is it just historical, how it's been? You asked about junior achievement. That is one that they did not historically have a board member on.
Oh,
I think my third or fourth week after I was elected, I met with them and they said, hey, we'd love to have a board member from the school district. So I did it for several years. But that's one, a couple of years ago, Dr. Allen expressed interest in, and I do think that's a partnership that's important, that we have someone represent.
Yeah, and
so
it's in the
making
middle
sure
of
it's on
so
the
much
list.
growth right now. I think it's
Yeah.
good that it stays
Yes.
where it's at. And I don't know if there's other committees. I'm just, not that I need to serve on 16 other ones, but I hate, like, the TPO one, I didn't know it said, the school board was represented and it hadn't been. So I'm assuming maybe Yvette or anyone else that gets notifications of things, they'll just pass along that can be added to that library.
Maybe what we could do is every board member could indicate what they're serving on,
Okay, in that library, that's good.
and then we can determine whether or not that needs to be looked at further.
Thank you.
Yeah, there was one policy that is in that list, and it relates to our value adjustment board.
Okay.
So the policy says additionally, it is the responsibility of the board to appoint one citizen member who owns a business occupying commercial space located within the school district and, or to the value adjustment board. And I don't think, in my time, and I don't know if you'll have any historical context on that one, we've appointed somebody to serve in that capacity.
Hey, what's the date on that policy?
Yeah, it does, that one does, well,
Doesn't have
2008.
Okay.
Yes.
Just curious.
Oh, and actually it was adopted in 2013.
Okay.
So that's something we can bring forward as well. All right, very good. Well, we'll get that document updated so you can see that in the library as well. The library, if you notice in the upper right-hand corner of board docs, there's a little drop-down. That's where this document or this list will exist. All right. And then we'll move on now to your board comments if you have any updates on your committee work and engagement. So at this point, Ms. Wyatt.
Thank you. I have all of the evaluations compiled. As we talked before the break, getting them in and meeting with everyone before Christmas was a tall order, as everybody was slam-packed with concerts and all of the end of the holidays events. So I've met with Ms. Matthews this morning, and then I have the rest this afternoon. So as soon as I've met with them, I will have Yvette send out the PDF documents, and then I can bring Superintendent Hides, I believe we've brought to a board meeting when talking about compensation and those types of things in the past. So after I meet with him, I'll chat with him about how best we think to handle that as far as moving forward. So, but that's where we are with this.
Thank you, Ms. Wyatt. Mr. Sharpless?
I have a few updates. I serve on the Polk Vision Operating Board, and I just want to talk about some of the team updates and some events that are happening through Polk Vision. First, you might want to mark your calendars and save the date. The Polk County Behavioral Health Symposium will be on May 1st, 2024. I think it's really important for us as a board. We had a great presentation about mental health at the last Polk Vision Operating Board meeting, and how specifically our students nationwide are having some serious mental health problems and issues. And so May 1st, 2024, Polk County Behavioral Health Symposium. Also, that'll be the only thing from Polk Vision I'll share now, and maybe if Sarah Beth, is there anything else you can share? I do want to say from FSBA, as I'm on I'm alternate on the board of directors there, I am attending the Day in the Legislature next week. I'm going up to use our platform as Polk County Public Schools, our legislative platform, to lobby our elected representatives. I think there's a lot of, and to Superintendent Hyde's point earlier, there's a lot of discussion right now going on about deregulation of our schools. We had last year with the HB1 and a lot of push towards school choice. Now let's make it choice competitive. So let's deregulate our public schools to make them more competitive with other options. So that conversation will be interesting, board members. And so I look forward to going up there and lobbying our elected officials. And in one particular point that's been brought up in FSBA, and something that I know my predecessor was really focused on, was an option for a CTE diploma. And that's something that I'm interested to see what the legislature his thoughts are on that. And so anyhow, and it's something to talk about earlier, Superintendent Hyde, your discussion on some students that are not meeting certain benchmarks or passing certain tests. Are those applicable to a potential career that they really need? And so I'm curious to see what comes about that conversation. So I look forward to having a conversation with you when I get back from Tallahassee. So anyhow, that's all I have.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Sharpless. And a reminder, that was one of our legislative platforms just a couple of years ago, in the idea of other high school equivalency options. I did see that Ms. Bell dropped a bill as well. I haven't had a chance to read that one, education bill. I know she's been talking with some of us in regards to school advisory councils. So look forward to reading that one and advocating with her as well. All right. No further business, it doesn't seem, at this point then. This meeting is adjourned.